Shing shing. Keg-Filet TCG. It's a great day here at Keg-Filet's YouTube, Patreon, Snapchat, Paramount Plus Prime. I am your host, the Keg-Filet. Today we have with you a Black Yellow Luffy guide for 7.5, and it's actually going to have to do a little bit with set 8. We'll go over set 8.5 probably in another video when that actually, is pertinent in the US, but we'll probably talk about it a little bit with Enigma. Today joining me for the second time, I have Enigma. It's Enigma on Twitter. You can find his socials down in the description. You'll see down here. Also, he does now do quite a bit of coaching. If you're interested in getting coaching on that, there'll be descriptions in my Discord. There'll be the looking for coaching and person coaching here, right? Or you can just reach out to him to see exactly what you're willing to, work together on. But without further ado, how are you doing, man?
Hello. It's been a while. I'm doing good.
Good.
Yeah. It's been a while since I've been on the channel. Been playing a lot of '09. But now that the ban list is released, I heard the ban list was released and it'll come into effect a week before nationals for the English side, which is crazy. But for us in the OCG, we're pretty happy with the ban list. Like, a lot of people have been sick of playing RP Law Winter. So we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, and then for some reason, the first time it's ever happened, Bandai has blessed us with not having to play Red Purple Law 08, right? So that
Yeah.
like that was a
It's
very
huge
welcome
blessing.
thing. I think everybody was really sad thinking about how bad that was going to be. They were hoping for like a Black Maria ban or something like that. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you know, like the general reaction was generally pretty good in that case, but everyone was still disappointed that our favorite 8-cost Moria card is still playable, and that's
Oh yeah.
also a
Actually,
different issue.
I think a lot of people here were actually very confident that this card was not getting banned. Because if you look, like, I think so maybe for
Yeah.
another video, but I think the power level has creeped so far that black decks are just being hard carried by Moria. And if you ban this card, I think the black decks would
Yeah.
actually just become tier 2.
They would have to make good other cards that do something similar,
Yeah.
right? Which I actually think that'd be a compromise, but Bandai has never been one to ban SRs. They usually maybe even restrict them just because it hits the hit list on the value of the decks, right? They don't. I don't know. But I will say it seems to be fine. And this deck, I would say it would definitely hurt this deck for sure. It wouldn't murder it, but it definitely would hurt pretty bad, I suppose.
It'd be really, really bad.
Yeah. But with that, we're going to talk a little bit first about Malaysia and Enigma, how's locals going there, and a couple things we did last time. We just kind of got to know him a little bit better. And then we'll just go straight into the Black Yellow Luffy guide, especially with deck lists. And we're going to talk about a lot of optional cards, especially our favorite 4-drop Kuzan that, ended up getting really, really popular in the middle of 07 and obviously 08 over there. So,
Sure.
without...
So,
Go ahead.
over here, we've been playing the 08 format for about 2 months. So, the list that we'll share today and we'll discuss today is kind of different from what I've been playing. If you followed me on Twitter, you know that I've been playing like a 4-cost Kuzan version, and I've been playing like 3 Shigans or 4 Shigans or finger guns and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I've been playing mostly to prep against RP Law. We've been playing RP Law Winter. Locals has went pretty good though. I think over the past month, so I haven't been that active in flagships, which is our tournaments here. But we actually have the serial ace version going on in the east. So basically, if you win a flagship, you get a serialized 10-cost ace. I think during July, I managed to snag like 5 of them. So it was a pretty good month. I went for like 7 flagships and won 5 of them.
Yeah. How much did those go
it was a
for
pretty
over
good
there?
month. Sorry?
How much money do those go for over there?
Yeah, so aces were going for about 1.5k USD.
Okay. Just for like a
Yep.
32-man local?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
that's
Pretty
that's
much.
so
Pretty much.
rich. That's so crazy.
Yep. 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 So flagships. You know, it's pretty sad that
Uh-huh.
English side misses out on flagships.
Uh-huh.
But I do think that when it comes to big events, your side event and your pricing
Uh-huh.
tends to be better than ours.
Yeah.
Because over here we only get pricing for like top 4.
Yeah. My question, my question is when if someone was to go over to Malaysia, Singapore, right? Those that kind of countries, and they were like, they're not from there, but they want to, participate in a ton of flagships. How would they go about that? Is that even
So we're
possible?
on the Bandai TCG app. So all you have to do is just create a Bandai TCG account,
Uh-huh.
apply, and then we'll just roll the dice for who gets to participate in the flagship.
Okay. Got it. So you have to like sign up beforehand, get in, and then obviously travel there. Are
Yeah.
they usually back to back, like day by day by day, or is it like almost every day of the week, or is this like usually on the weekends for certain card
Yeah, they're
stores?
usually on the weekends.
Uh-huh.
So the good thing is if you actually want to make a trip, usually the registration is open like a month beforehand.
Mhm.
So you can see which weekend has the most flagships and then just try your luck applying. And
Okay.
then yeah, you'll usually like you'll get notified um on the near the previous month end if you have a slot.
Okay. Yeah. It sounds extremely. It should be extremely competitive, right? But I just
Yeah, I
imagine all
do
these
think yeah.
European players and U.S. players coming over. That'd be
I
funny.
mean, you know, we have the I think there's a reason why we have the world champ from our country.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. For sure, for sure. I mean, they're all so close, right? These top players. So as far as things go, but I'm not saying we'd sweep over and just win them. It's like at least it'd be a different kind of game, right? So it'd be
Yeah.
interesting because people never thought about that, right? And when they're thrown like, oh, this may be incentive, and like, oh, I wanted to go to Malaysia anyway to see
Yeah,
how
yeah,
that is, right?
for
So
sure, for sure.
okay.
I wish Bandai had English and Japanese on the same format because I used to play other Bandai card games,
Hmm.
and it's just very unfortunate that you
Hmm.
can't play at the same pace.
Yeah, yeah. Well, some people they do choose to play at the Japanese format and online a lot. Um, so they're just really ahead for some reason. Even though when they go to locals, they're basically, and sometimes these players aren't even very good at locals. Like they just like to play the new stuff, right? That's the crazy thing. Most like really good U.S. European players, they just stick to what's being played right now. And even back,
Yeah,
back in '06 when '07 was becoming a thing, I wasn't like practicing a lot of '07. I waited till '07 came out and then did most of my practicing then because it's just a lot of work to do like on the simulator and online. I don't know if is it like that for where you guys are at too. You guys are always practicing like the next like '09, and you have to do that with like proxies or even just sim or just theory. um
um, I think it depends for person to person. For me, I have a play group, so most of what I do is just theory and then play testing if it works.
okay, god, do you guys have like a set time you have every like week to jump into that, like it's like a job
Um,
or
no, no. Yeah, we're all working adults, so we don't have
oh.
time to yeah, we don't have as much time as we would like to do all of that.
Mhm.
But usually at the start of a set, like a start of a new set or before like big competitions,
Mm.
well maybe like put aside some time to really go through all the theory. And then once the theory's there, yeah, I mean like once the theory's there, all that's there is to play, right?
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Got it. Well, it sounds actually really interesting. With that, let's actually jump into the guide in general, but I first wanted to go over I guess just why. Why should we even consider playing BY Luffy for OPO 7.5, set 8? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So if we look at the OP7 format, like I think the OP7 format is kind of rock paper scissors ish.
Uh-huh.
Like, obviously a lot of decks are good, and if they're not good, they're kind of close to each other. So at the top of the meta, you used to have RP Law, Lucci, BY, and then some decks that would trail behind are Enel or Bonnie. And so decks tend to usually have like a matchup that they will just completely steamroll, and also a matchup that is just kind of like will just completely lose to. So Lucci just eats Enel but loses to BY. Enel eats RP Law but loses to Lucci. RP Law has a pretty good matchup against everything on the field. But then
Mm-hmm.
like really struggles against Enel in '07. So it's kind of rock paper scissors. But now with this ban list gone, with RP Law taking a hit, I think what happens is one is BY doesn't really suffer. Like nothing's changed to the deck. You've just had another competitor just um
Yeah.
get shafted. You don't really have to worry about that. So initially, if you were playing like four Rocket Luffys or you're playing cards like Ivankov or Thunderbolt, you don't have to worry about that anymore because it's just no longer a relevant matchup. And I think the meta's slowing down a lot because RP Law really was the only aggro deck in the meta. Decks that could come back are Doffy and Reiju, but their power level just isn't the same as RP Law, and
Mm-hmm.
those decks aren't that great into other decks in the format. Like
Mm-hmm.
Doffy is still not that great against Lucci. Reiju is not that great against Lucci. Like Reiju hasn't changed. All you have is just a double Ichiji turn if you high roll and stuff like that. So it's not like any other deck really got a buff. BY stays the same, but the meta is becoming slower, and you have one less competitor to worry about. So what happens is, I think the next best decks that come up into the meta are there might be more Bonnie players because Bonnie used to struggle against RP Law, and there might be more Nami players because now there really isn't an aggro deck in the meta. But when you think about it, apart from Bonnie, BY still has a 50-50, if not better, matchup against everything across the board.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think your matchup is bad into Doffy. It's not bad into Reiju. Great into Enel. Great into Lucci. Your
Yeah.
matchup is like 50-50 at least against Nami. So all you really need to worry about is Bonnie. And honestly speaking, I think Bonnie is a deck that, if you take to a big event, if there are a lot of Bonnie players, I think that Bonnie might just get eventually wiped out in the early rounds by Lucci and Nami. Like Bonnie's a
Yeah.
slow deck too. The only answer they have to Nami is 9 cost Zoro. But I've actually seen Nami players starting to tech Red Rock just for the Bonnie matchup. Yeah,
Is
like they'll play
do,
like two or three
do you
because like
see a lot of
that's all they need to
bodies?
see, right?
Do you see a lot of
Um,
bodies like at locals or flagships at all?
so in '09, no one played Bonnie because the matchup into RP Law was just so hard.
Yeah.
But like after post ban, I saw a surge of people buying Bonnie cards. Like
Yeah. Well,
there are a lot of people who will be playing Bonnie.
here in the US, ever since Bonnie came out, she's been extremely popular. It actually a lot of people did not want to play Black Yellow Luffy at locals, including me, because there were so many Bonnies. But now I just say, okay, it's still a green deck, so it's pretty terrible. I have to assume half their hand is bricks. So let's see if I need to get over this matchup, right? That's basically
Yeah,
what I had to decide to do. So at locals, you're kind of decentivized to do it here, but it seems something close to there. When Red Purple Law was banned, now people are more into playing Bonnie, following
they are.
Noel's
They are.
list and such. So
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, apart from Bonnie, I mean, this deck is still great. Like, and you can tech for the Bonnie matchup. I
mhm,
still think the Bonnie matchup's pretty bad, but you can try to give yourself a fighting chance. But against every
mhm.
other matchup, like you're extremely chilling.
Yeah, and especially at a national event, because this just so you know, our nationals, you can only go if you get an invite, right? And most people usually qualified when Sakazuki was still a deck, when Rob Lucci, Gecko Moria, Reiju, these kind of decks were in format. Only maybe I can only think of like 5 or 6 people that actually qualified with Bonnie specifically, and this is like top
Ooh,
32 at a bunch of like 1,000 people tournaments, right? I can only think of like 5 or 6 people. And I would assume most of those people aren't going to just switch to Bonnie because they qualify the red purple law. They're probably just going to stick with Luffy or Rob Lucci. I think, funny enough, I'm finding Rob Lucci to be the deck a lot of people switch to, and they just tech extremely for this matchup in particular, right?
It might, yeah.
Which is another whole story to be overall, which I'll kind of go over my experiences. I'll let you know, because essentially they do have ways of maybe winning, but it is a little more high roll than it was before. But maybe you can give some thoughts, because I assume Rob Lucci is still an extremely popular deck in 08 and 09, right?
Yeah.
So,
It was like second most popular then.
yeah. Okay. Got it. Well, we got over the why to play the deck, and then we'll go over the deck list a little bit. I actually want to talk about cards that were not playing in this list, just to kind of go over, and we're gonna kind of compare this to last guide a little bit. Is Ace? We didn't actually have any Ace in our last guide. We don't have any Ace in this guide, but during the middle of the set, you did switch, I believe, to at least 2-2 or 3-3 Ace, right? I'm assuming that's just so you can actually combo, because Law was a deck and it also had other good things with that. Why are we actually actively choosing not to play Ace now? Just room?
Yeah, so I was playing Ace again in the middle of 09. I was playing Ace just because I just wanted to play a more high roll ceiling of the deck against RP Law. But then I only played it for I think like 1 week, and then I just took it out immediately afterwards because um I think Ace feels really, really bad when you need to stabilize in the game. Like Ace is a card, like if you're, if it's an even game, then you can push for advantage. But if you're falling behind, the ace in your hand just doesn't do anything. And the problem with ace has always been you want to see enough ace in your hand to be able to combo and play it as a finisher. But you also don't want to play more ace, because if you see multiple copies of ace in your hand, it's just a dead card. So throughout like the 1 week that I was playing ace, I just realized I could just play something else that helps me achieve my curve better. And that's why I decided to play Borsalino again. And I think, I mean, we'll go through this deck list later, but something that I want to highlight is how important I think it is to play curve. Like there are a lot of cards that are good in general. Like I think 4-cost Kuzan is a great card in general. Replaces itself, is a draw engine, puts a threatening body on the board. But the reason why I don't play it is because it just doesn't fit into my curve. It doesn't help me achieve the plan that I want to execute.
Okay. Got it, yeah. Okay. With the rest of the deck list, I first want to go over the Awakeners that we know of, Flampe, Hiyori, and then I guess in your first kind of general build, you still have 3 Mach, just in case you need to get down from 2-0 life, right? With a big Luffy. So, with that case, 7 Searchers. I mean, is this ever a card where you ever go down to like 0 or 1 or 2?
I actually really do want to. Like, if there was a world where Great Eruption wasn't banned, I'd play 4 Great Eruption, so that this would be a 46 card deck. But I think it's perfectly fine. The reason why why I'd still play Searchers in an OP 7.5 is, I mean, consistency aside, right? It's just that I think in an O7 rock paper scissors format, um, there are specific adults that are really good in certain matchups and are just terrible in other matchups. And so I only want to see one adult in the deck, and that's why I just want to up my consistency count.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I have the same feeling. Sometimes this Luffy's really good, and sometimes this Luffy's busted, right? So, got it. With that, we'll go over kind of the 2 sticky top ends that we're thinking of. Is number 1 Isho? Why are we even looking at this card? This wasn't even looked at the last video, and you brought this up as like a Frankenstein thing, right? A deck list, and is this like a card people have to play around now, so they have to push you down in life and actually help you out? What's your thought on Isho?
It is. I think this is like a bastard card. This card is so ugly. Like, it's actually really poetic because during O7, like when you play against black decks will slam this on you and then they'll drop Moria. But now you're like, I'm the one playing Isho, right? So I mean, we'll talk about two lists because
Okay.
there's a 10 cost Kuzan here, and then later there's the Ice Age version.
Yeah.
But the reason why we're playing Isho is primarily just for the mirror. So previously, when you play the mirror, what ends up happening is both players actually just don't touch each other. Like, you don't touch each other, you don't swing each other at all, and then whoever is able to play the first 9k body in the mirror and start their life and spam Moria tends to have the advantage because they get the 9k body on the board first. So every turn they are ahead of one card because they get to swing you 9k for free.
Mhm.
But also, we just don't swing your body because we don't want you to see more pieces. We don't want you to see like an extra sabo to help you build consistency and stuff.
Yeah,
But the
yeah,
problem with that is if we both stare at each other, so assuming you don't play Isho, the old problem was the game is also kind of a variance fest. Like if one player drew more sabos or drew more Moria, that player just tended to have an advantage because they just had more Moria. And I didn't want to play this matchup where even if I'm doing the best I can with my hand, I just didn't top deck a Moria, and then I lose because my
yeah,
opponent saw 3 Morias.
yeah.
So the solution to this was simple. You just play another 9k body, so you can play it on curve, and you play a 9k body that has a useful effect, which is Isho,
Okay.
right? So, if your opponent tries to starve you and play this like long matchup where they just don't hit you, like just throw down Isho. Like I've slammed 2 Ishos down on a BY player before, and he just offered me a handshake. So yeah, like this card is really, really good. This card's good into Nami as well.
Yeah.
Because against Nami you're looking for like big bodies and sometimes you just don't draw Moria. But you can play this as well. And I do expect there to be an upsurge of Nami. This
Yeah.
card is great against Enel. This card is really good against Bonnie. Um
Mhm.
Against 8 cost kit. Like obviously if you're playing the 10 cost Kuzan version, on your 8 down turn, you probably need to set up Rocket Luffy instead. But in general, against Bonnie, this card's like really good because Bonnie is like a resource deck, and if you just have a 9k body for free early on, it's really, really good.
Okay.
But there is one thing that I wanted to mention with the mirror matchup when you play Isho. So Isho fundamentally changes how you play the mirror because now you can't starve your opponent and you have to start swinging them. So if you play Isho and your opponent starts swinging you, you're actually really happy because what ends up happening is you get to see more cards, you get to dictate the pace of the game,
Mhm.
and like the BY player, if you play a mirror, they're not gonna swing you past 2 life. Like no one's gonna swing you to 1 life.
Yeah.
So if you can match, like if you go second and you play Borsa, Sabo, Isho, like if you play Borsa, Sabo, you will always have a window to play Isho because on their 5 down turn, they can't swing you without playing a 5 drop. So if they play a 5 drop, you just block with Borsa. And if you play a Sabo, like you're guaranteed
Okay.
to play down Isho.
Yeah. Even if they're being aggressive, right? So that's
Yep.
I really like the way because I had the same scenario yesterday. I had an e-show, but I didn't have a blocker down first, and so I didn't have a safe area to do that. But
Mm,
because of this, you're setting up to do that. Okay.
yep.
Um, because that was kind of actually the major problem. You'd even see Bonnies attacking Black Yellow Luffy players a little bit, so they can play around 10 drop Kuzan. But if you already have blockers down, you don't essentially care, right? So
Yep.
unless you're really afraid of a Hody Jones, it's going to cost you your whole hand, which might be okay, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Actually, speaking of the Hody jumps, so the reason why we play Borsa too is, and obviously this is a bit of a high roll because it's a 4 card combo. But if you go second and you drop Borsa into Sabo into Rocket Luffy, even if you get Hody Jones on 9 down turn, they're in a bad spot because Hody Jones has to rest Rocket Luffy so that they clear it before you play 10 Kuzan.
yeah, but you have two
But
blockers.
yeah, we have 2 blockers, right? So you just trade off the board and then like you're perfectly fine.
Okay.
So yeah, I think Borsas is a great card in general.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. Okay, that does help out quite a bit. Plus, it's a 1K counter, right? It's never too hurtful.
Yeah.
So, not like Kuzan. Kuzan would hit you in that bad way.
Yeah, if you
Also,
see multiple Kuzan in your hand, it feels
yeah.
terrible.
Also, there's really no way for us to play around Isho. 6 cards. Actually, no deck can play around Isho. 6 cards is like the bare minimum. I have seen decks where they've had 5 cards in hand where it's like, how the heck did that even happen? You know, like
Yep.
that's so bizarre and random. But you might start seeing people playing against this guys a little bit more, playing with 5 cards in hand. But usually that means you have a pretty good advantage because their deck isn't going to be as consistent. You know,
Yeah, I don't think anybody can forcibly play with 5 cards in their hand. In a slower
yeah,
meta like this, it just doesn't make sense.
yeah, exactly. You need a lot of fuel. A lot of fuel. And then, of course, a 10 drop Kuzan. This has helped to control board. I know some matchups we probably wouldn't even consider playing this. Like, I wouldn't
Yep.
actually consider playing this unless the matchup was too slow, like against black, blue, or maybe Enel if I'm afraid of Origo, right? Because it's like, at least I kind of wasted a turn, right, of theirs. That might be a thought. What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
Kuzan?
I know people have said that like, oh, they just raggle my Tenkos Kuzan and then like the turn just passes. And I say yes, the turn passes. That's like perfectly acceptable for you. Like, can you
Mm,
imagine if you just went 1 for 1, but the
mm,
Enel player isn't attacking you and you're attacking the Enel player? That sounds
mm,
great to me. So, which is why, you know, if you have Borsa against the Enel matchup, it's a card you never have to worry about. If you played Sabo instead of Luffy on turn 3, it's guaranteed to stick there because basically you go Sabo and then you go
vacated it.
AK Luffy,
Yeah.
and then Katakuri has to remove something, so you'll always have 2 things on the board. So basically, if they trade Raigo for your 10 cost Kuzan while they're at 1
Mhm.
HP, you just swing your leader 5k and then you ask them if they want to block.
Okay. Got it. With that, let's jump into the second list a little bit. So, with that, the second list, you had 3 Ice Ages to the Kuzans. I believe you were saying this is more for like a Bonnie matchup because you want more of a tempo
Yep.
removal because they might, do something a little bit differently. And then we are running 3 E-shows. Now we're upping up that annoying factor. Can you explain this deck list a little bit more than what I just did?
Yep, sure. So on the first list, on the first list, the reason why we only okay, we'll talk about the differences first.
Yeah.
So in pure turn, like in pure card quantity, the first list ran 2 10 cost Kuzan, and the second list is running 3 Ice Age. The
Mhm.
reason why we up the Ice Age count is because if we're playing 10 cost Kuzan, we only need to see 1 copy of 10 cost Kuzan. Like in the Bonnie matchup, right? Like with the 10 cost Kuzan list,
Mhm.
basically your curve is I want to set up Borsa, I want to set up Sabo, and then the turn before I play Tenkos Kuzan, I want to play Rocket Luffy, and I want to spend like the turn I slam Tenkos Kuzan is the turn that the game ends. So like you don't actually lose the game when your opponent runs out of life or you run out of life. The climax of the game is decided if you can protect your board enough to play Tenkos Kuzan and take over the game. Because once Tenkos Kuzan is down, like you just instantly win the body matchup.
Mhm.
So that's the general game plan for the first list. But for the second list, you're playing a more aggro version. So instead of looking to set up multiple blockers and then a Rocket Luffy, what you're actually looking for is you're looking for 8k Luffy, and then
Yep.
you're aiming to just swing the Bonnie every turn. So once you so like turn 3 you slam down 8k Luffy, then turn 4 you slam down Isho, and basically you just have all these big bodies that keep swinging, and you're never worried about these bodies getting swung back because they're like they just have higher base power than Bonnie's characters. And
Mhm.
then you just Ice Age the Zoro. So you're just playing a tempo deck. Instead of playing blockers, you trade off setting up a 10 cost Kuzan for being able to play Isho on 8 Dawn. And then you're basically forced to play Ice Age because you will
Mhm.
never have a chance to play 10 cost Kuzan anymore. So you're trading off like a more defensive game plan for just, I'm going to swing you at your face. I'm going to play Isho on curve to rip resources out of you. None of your board cares about Hody Jones because you're 8k, 9k base. And if they drop Zoro, you just go Ice Age and then you KO them.
Okay. Got it. It sounds like when we get to the matchup portion, there might be a little bit of a funky scenario where we might be even guarding out of like maybe an early attack or two, or maybe in the middle game, or we're setting up for, or maybe not the first attack. Maybe be like, maybe it is scary to go from 2 to 1 life if we're planning to remove. Um,
Yeah, I don't think we ever when you play against Bonnie, I don't think you ever guard early simply
yeah.
because Bonnie will always swing you, I think, until you're at 2 life. Like,
Yeah.
you know, and this is also like a tip for nationals, because someone told me that nationals might be open deck list after top cut,
It is.
which sounds crazy.
It
Oh,
is.
is that confirmed?
It was last year. I've been in top cuts that were less crazy,
Oh
and it
my
was open
god.
deck list. My opponent knew I only run one pudding. They were playing Sakazuki, so I just didn't play around
Okay,
pudding. So yeah,
so here's the problem. If you play 10 cost Kuzan, the Bonnie is gonna swing you. Like, if they know you're on 10 cost Kuzan,
yeah.
they'll swing you to 1 life. But if like generally, like if it's a closed deck list, like Bonnie players are kind of juggling between 10 cost Kuzan and Ice Age. So the safest play for them is to just swing you early and leave you at 2. And then, then they'll just ask you, what do you want to do? Because they're gonna set up like Cavendish, Hawkins, and then Hody Jones. And so it's just kind of awkward for you if you're at 2 life. But if it is open deck list, the reason why I think the Ice Age version is better, because regardless of whether the Bonnie player tries to starve you or not, if your curve is to play 8k Luffy, then you can always control your life so that you can Ice Age Rocket Luffy when the 9 cost Zoro comes on.
Okay.
Yeah. So if it is open deck list, I would definitely play the Ice Age Isho version, because it's more um as long as you see 8k Luffy, you can control your life, so they can't starve you. And even if they don't starve you and they just swing your life, well, if they swing your life, then you are never gonna have the chance to play 10 cost Kuzan anyway. So that's why I'd rather just play Ice Age.
Okay. Yeah. I guess I would suggest people to try out both different lists, right, for when they're in their testing. But at least we have two good options going forward with that, because it can be awkward with the 10 drop Kuzan half the time. I find, right, for a lot of people. But if but so is like also just not being able to remove your opponent's board. So when you really want to, because there's I think this is why I like the Borsellino so much, is because it actually allows you to not have to become like a 7 or 9k leader, right?
Yeah.
Or you can just afford just to only be a 7k leader, which is pretty nice sometimes, right? So okay, great. I think
Also, just as a general tip while we're on the Bonnie matchup, if the Bonnie player swings you on turn 2, do not guard it. Like, just take life until you're at 2 life. Because if you guard early, to like new players, if you think, oh, I'm gonna drop 10 cost Kuzan, and you guard early, the Bonnie player is just gonna swing you again. But the Bonnie player will stop swinging you when you're low on life. So, if they're
yeah.
just gonna stop in the end, like, just let them hit you.
Yeah, exactly. With that, let's go over the optional cards as well. We did talk a little bit about Kuzan before, how it was used so much. I'm sure you're actually going to be seeing this quite a bit against other Black Yellow Luffy players that aren't just, woke like the rest of us. Kuzan, I mean, it's still usable, but it's not like your goal anymore, right? That's kind of the main thing.
Yep. So I've seen a lot of people playing like 4 copies of this card. And okay, so I used to play 4 copies of this card, 2 in 09, but only played in 09. And the reason why I only played in 09 is because you just want to replace a body, because it's just gonna get blood decked by RP Law anyway.
Okay.
4 cost Kuzan is a card meant to fight against RP Law. And even then I stopped the board set at the end, because I realized that they can actually just play around Kuzan.
Yeah.
But um, I'll say what I've like said to everyone who's asked me whether they should play 4 cost Kuzan. It doesn't hit, like, there are no relevant 8 costs in the game that I think 4 cost Kuzan needs to hit, except Moria and Isho in the black matchup. But realistically speaking, who is gonna leave your Kuzan on the board in a black matchup, right? I don't
Yeah.
think it ever happens.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, right? Like, I don't think it happens. But
Because
the other thing is, I will like agree with you that 4 cost Kuzan is a great card. Like, it replaces itself, so if you play it, it's never a dead card. It's a draw engine in BY, which, like, this deck loves draw engines. And it's a threat on the board. But the reason why I don't play 4 cost Kuzan is just Against any of the decks that I'm struggling with in the meta, this card doesn't help me achieve my curve.
Mhm.
So like what's my curve, right? When I play into Bonnie, if I'm playing the 10 cost Kuzan version, my curve is just Sabo, Rocket, Luffy, Kuzan. And I need to see this curve because any other variation of this curve is suboptimal. And if my opponent sees perfect curve and drops 9 Zoro, then I'm probably gonna lose the game. Like I need to see that curve.
Okay.
If this card's great into Enel, sure, but personally, I don't think you need more tech into the Enel matchup.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
card, yeah, right. So into the mirror, like this card is not great either because even if you think I'm gonna KO my opponent's Isho or Moria, you're playing against a deck that has a searchable Sabo. So like their forecast Kuzan is never doing anything, and this card's like not great into the Nami matchup as well. So
Mhm.
this card in general, great card in the BY deck, but when I think about what I want to do each turn, there's never a turn where I would rather play Kuzan than another card in my deck. So when I built my deck list, like my main goal is just I have a curve and game plan that I want to achieve, and I just want to play cards that achieve that game plan.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. With that, the next card I want to go over is a Vonkov. I think this was used again in kind of the red purple law matchup a little bit, and some people kind of still look at this card as another kind of awakener with it being a blocker. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Um. No, stop playing this card. Like RP loss gone. We don't need to play this card. This card's really good if you will need to go 7k base. So technically this card's like good into Doffy. Like if you're worried about Doffy, you can play this card. But uh, again, there really isn't a great aggro deck in the meta now. So I just don't see why you would need to play this card. Um for those like who are still thinking this card's a blocker, this card is a -3. Like you play it, you -1 card from your hand,
And
you
your
lose
life.
one card from your life, and then you lose another card from your hand. Like it's a -3 if it gets removed. It's a -2 if it's a blocker on the field.
Yeah.
And that sounds pretty bad.
Yeah. Yeah. But it is a blocker, so now it's a -1. So it's pretty bad, yeah, overall.
It's a -2 because you
Yeah.
lose 2 cards from your hand. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's very costly for sure, right?
Yeah.
So, I'll awaken other ways, I suppose. So,
Yep.
with that yellow Sabo, I do see some players even taking in maybe one or so of these, especially for the mirror. What are your thoughts?
Yep. So I've seen people play like one or two. So the argument is if you go second in the mirror, you can KO the opponent's AK Luffy. And if you play into body, you can KO their Cavendish.
Mhm.
Um, KOing Cavendish isn't that bad. It kind of achieves the same
Mhm.
result as Finger Gun, which we'll talk about later. And a lot of the things that we're talking about today are just for the body matchup because, like, I think this just goes to show how good this deck is into every other matchup. Like in our previous video, everything we talked about in all of the previous
Mhm.
matchups are basically the same. Like the way you play BY is the same into every other deck.
Yeah.
But now we're just worried about Bonnie because
Yeah.
RP Law isn't
Well,
that great at
before
that.
I was like, if you
But
see Bonnie, just let's high roll. But if you see too many Bonnie, don't play this deck. But now it's like,
yeah,
okay, there's
yeah.
gonna be a. We'll just. How do we
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
love
We'll
Bonnie? Yeah.
concede, we'll play a bit more tech. But yeah,
Yeah.
so 5+ Sabo. In the mirror, I actually think this card is useless because if you're playing against a good player, what they'll do is they'll just drop Sabo on turn 3. Like
Yeah.
no good player will ever drop 8k Luffy on turn 3 because if they drop 8k Luffy, you open yourself up to Finger Gun, you open yourself up to Sabo, you open yourself up to
Mhm.
Thunderbolt. There's just no reason. So people will always play Sabo instead. So this card just becomes dead in the mirror.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Okay. Got it. Last card. Well, we'll go over Thunderbolt a little bit as well, but last card for this is actually Finger Gun or Shigan, and it's just like a jet pistol. It's really strong, right? With this scenario, fills up the trash. It was pretty used in Kuzan and for these things, but you have a lot of tech now built around this card with the Borsellino and the way you play with Sabos and such. What are your thoughts on Shigan if we were to try to run this?
Yeah. So again, Shigan basically fulfills the same purpose as Sabo. Like in all the scenarios where you play Shigan, um you know, against Mirror, it's the KO like an AK Luffy, but usually they'll just play Sabo anyway, so it's really not that big a deal. And then you KO the Cavendish. And so the whole idea is like you just slow down the game. So Sabo and Shigan are basically the same thing in your deck. If you really wanted to play them, the trade-off is basically um I think you can play multiple copies of Shigan, but you don't really want to play multiple copies of Sabo. Just plus Shigan is more versatile.
Yeah.
But I do want to highlight to everyone watching this video, when you play cards like these, um, like don't play these cards because they're general purpose cards. Like try to think of, is there a specific target I want to hit with these cards? Because in a BY Luffy deck, once you get to 10 Dawn, like you're never playing a Shigan, right? 10 Dawn is like when you start engine and you play Moria, Moria, Moria. So the only window where you have to play Shigan is like when you're on like 5 Dawn, 7 Dawn. So I want you to ask yourself, like when you're building a list, is there any matchup? Is there like any point in time where playing a Shigan would actually be more beneficial than playing a Sabo or an 8K Luffy?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and to me, I haven't found a scenario where it's actually better, except maybe killing like Cavendish on curve. But even if I play AK Luffy or Sabo, it's not that much weaker to play.
Yeah.
And so I'd rather just not play Shigan.
Okay. Got it. And then lastly, pretty similar card of a Thunderbolt, with that maybe just cheaper and itself awakens. And it kind of, again, where are you going to play this at? There's a window, and that window isn't going to be like at 8 to 10 Dawn. It's going to be somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right. And your
Pretty
opponent
much,
has to
pretty
walk
much.
into it. Like they have to literally
Pretty
say,
much.
please KO this target. And they're expecting mostly Finger Gun. If they're expecting Finger Gun, they may not even play a card. Right. Because of that. Like it actually, quick question. If you're expecting like, you know, your opponent and they literally just show you a Finger Gun, like you just know that they probably have a Finger Gun in their hand. Do you even play the 5 drop down that turn unless it's a Sabo? You just say, okay, I'm not even, you're not
Yeah,
gonna
yeah,
play
I'll
Luffy.
play it regardless.
Okay.
Because like it's basically a 1-for-1.
Okay.
And
Oh, because they can't
I
develop.
think it's fine. Like
Yeah.
so like theoretically, if you Shinger Gun if you Shigan Finger Gun an 8K Luffy, right? If you Shigan Finger Gun an 8K Luffy, you basically trade 1-for-1. But the guy that played 8K Luffy like had the chance to activate his ability.
Mhm.
So you as the Shigan player, you are only ahead, like this 1-for-1 trade-off is only more valuable to you if you can find utility after the AK Luffy is removed.
Okay.
And so maybe utility is like if the opposing player does not have an AK Luffy anymore, and then now you can play your AK Luffy, and then
Mhm.
now you can like generate value after that. But you know, when you're playing in the mirror and they have like Sabos to dig their deck, they have like searchers.
Mhm.
I don't think it's that uncommon to see a second 8K Luffy. And even if you Shigan to KO the first 8K Luffy, your board is still empty. So you are still technically playing catch up in board priority. Like if you drop your 8K Luffy and you activate his ability and your opponent doesn't see a second 8K Luffy,
Mhm.
well, the thing is, you need 2 turns for your 8K Luffy to be on board before you actually got more value out of that one 8K Luffy than your opponent's 8K Luffy.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a great card if you want to slow down the game. Which is why if you're playing the 10 cost Kuzan version, like I've seen, the regional second place list, because it's from Team SFK and they have like a Singaporean team as well. So they're all
Mhm.
playing the same list, if I'm not wrong. They're playing 4 cost Kuzan and 4 Shigan, and I think that they're also playing 10 cost Kuzan.
Yeah.
So the general game plan is just to slow down the game with Finger Gun and then
Yeah.
make you have to deal with the Kuzan. But I think if like again, these cards are meant to slow down the game. If your plan is to slow down the game, I would rather play a Borsalino than a Kuzan. And I don't think you need Finger Gun. Yeah, I just don't think you need Finger Gun.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Good. I mean, I think we talked about Shinger Gun quite a bit there.
Yeah.
We'll leave it with that. I'm glad we went over at least all the options for this. For the rest of the guide, we are going to be looking at the first deck list, but obviously we'll do mentions of the second deck list. People at home should know that regardless of whatever deck list you see here or topping an event, you should adjust due to either your playstyle or what you're expecting to see, and usually it's going to be a difference of a handful of cards. So with that, let's actually jump into some more basic things before we get into more technical things, and that's actually to do with the mulligan. What are your thoughts on mulliganing? What are we mulliganing for?
Yeah. So earlier we talked about how I hate playing searchers. Like I hated playing searchers in 09 because like there was this one week where I like didn't play One Piece for a week and I came back for a tournament and then I played a searcher in my first game and I bottom decked 3 Moria and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna go home after this. So I hate searchers, but we'll still play them because in 07 different adults are really good into different matchups. So since we're talking about the 10 cost Kuzan list, yeah, I mean, your mulligan criteria will differ based on what your matchup is. So, I mean, what matchups do you want to start
Yeah,
with?
let's start with the mirror. What are we looking for in the mirror?
Okay, in the mirror, I think you just hard mull for Moria and Isho.
Okay.
Like in the mirror, I'm just hard mulliganing for Moria and Isho because a searcher, like if you draw a searcher is basically a mulligan. Like if you think about it that
Yeah.
way, a searcher is
Yeah.
basically a mulligan because you see 5 cards. And I firmly believe if you play 4 Sabo, 4 Borsalino, and 3 searcher, you will be able to slow the game down enough to always allow you to consistently see cards.
Okay.
Which is why I just think the only cards you need to see are just Moria and Isho.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, I think that makes sense. The Moriarty show, mostly for that. Okay. Bonnie, what should we be looking for against Bonnie? What are we mulliganing for?
Yeah, if you're playing the 10 cost Kuzan build, um, well, first criteria is obviously you're looking for 10 cost Kuzan. No matter how goated your opening hand is, if you don't draw 10 cost Kuzan, you just die to 9 cost Zoro on the spot.
Yeah.
So 10 cost Kuzan first. And honestly, because you're only keeping 2 copies, I think no matter what hand I draw, I would keep a 10 cost Kuzan in my hand. Unless my opening hand was like 2k, 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 a Chal, and a 10 cost Kuzan. Then I would mulligan it. But if I have 10 cost Kuzan and like 1 Sabo, I think that's a hand I keep. That's a hand I keep any day.
Got it. So these filter cards, and then obviously we're looking to see a Rocket Luffy into Kuzan at some point, right?
Yes.
Setting up for in that scenario. Before a lot of hands would end up being like big. You'd have a big Luffy and a Garp and like a little Sabo and like some other Awakener. But it's just not enough right now, right? We need to look for essentially a top end. Most
You
of the
need to
time.
find the 10 cost Kuzan or Ice Age that you're playing. Like
Yeah.
you need to see it.
Yeah.
It's the same as if you're playing Enel into Bonnie, you need to hard mulligan for Raigo because you just lose to 1 card, which is absurd.
Yeah, it's that bad, and sometimes you'll play multiple of them, so at least you'll have an option for multiple of them in this deck, and not in yellow. Yellow, you're just like, oh, they played a second one. I guess I lose. So okay, got it. Enel, what should we be looking for? Maybe to mulligan into Enel with.
When I play against Enel, I'm also looking for Moria. You'll notice that my mulligan criteria usually is just Moria, because this card just hard carries the deck, and the problem is just if you don't see it in your opening hand, the rest of your deck is searchable. So if you just see a searcher, like it's basically the same as a mulligan, but Moria isn't, and so you really feel comfortable if you see a Moria. But other than that, like top end, if you see Moria, it's great. If you see Isho, it's great. Tenko's Kuzan isn't that important for this matchup. It's more of a, if I see it and I play it, that's great. If I don't, the deck just operates the same way as it does. But in terms of adult priority, I want to see Sabo first, 8k Luffy second, And then I don't really care about Rocket Luffy. Like I'll just see one copy later in the game, and that's enough for me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we do need to like make sure we have at least a baby to combo 1 point in
If
the
I don't
game.
have a baby in my opening hand, I think it's okay if the rest of my hand is fine. Like if I
Okay.
have a Flampe, a Moria, and a Sabo in my opening hand, like I'm
Yeah.
more than happy to keep
I
that.
feel like we're never mulliganing for babies, but we're just kind of like crossing our fingers, hoping we see one. Right?
Yeah,
That's the case.
because we play 7 searchers, right? So like
Yeah.
we'll always see it.
Yeah.
Also, just like as a tip, I don't know if I mentioned this in the previous video, but I see a lot of people as well as when I do coaching, where they'll play searchers early on in the game.
Mm.
I'm not a fan of playing searchers early on in the game because I think that when you play a deck like where you have like Sabos and then you're eventually seeing your life,
Yeah.
the cards that you need in your hand on turn 1 can be vastly different from the cards that you need on turn 5.
Okay.
So, after drawing cards to Sabo and stuff like that, usually on the turn you start engine, you'll always have an extra Dawn to play a searcher.
Mm.
So you can decide what you need later
Okay.
on.
That's one of those really, really big tips. So just to be clear, tip is try not to use your searchers early. Use them later because that's when you know you'll need those. Like you have more options, per se, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, okay, got it. Let me think here. What are we looking to mulligan for against, let's say, Rob Lucci? Is there really any specific criteria, or is it just like our general curve, and then they have to play into us?
I think it's just our general curve. You'll notice that I'm not saying Mulligan for Borsa in any of the matchups because you don't need to. The card is just there because it's just a
Yeah,
nice card. It's never dead in your hands.
yeah.
Borsa is also one less card in the Lucci. Like if you don't see Sabo, you can also just play Borsa in
Mhm.
the Lucci matchup. But my Mulligan for criteria will be if I'm going first, I actually don't mind playing 8k Luffy on turn 3
Okay.
because without stage, they have to play ice. Like, there's no way they KO you. They have to play Ice Age Brook, or they have to like swing you, play Suru and Lucci.
Yeah.
And in all of those combinations, they drop 2 cards from their hand, and their leader has to swing you. So technically, you lose, like you awaken 2 life
Yeah.
by playing 1 card. So I think it's really good. But
Okay.
otherwise, I'm just looking for I think just consistency. Like if you can see yourself um finding like if your hand has like a Sabo and some life takers, then I think that's good enough for me. And also of course if you have more in your opening hand, then yeah. But against Lucci, your deck is pretty flexible.
Mhm.
Um if you think your hand's not great, I think the 2 cards that you would search for are Moria and Sabo.
Yeah.
But otherwise, like if your hand looks playable, then like just play it,
Okay.
right? Because like your searcher will eventually find Sabo, and then
Mhm.
you play Sabo, and eventually, once you start engine, like your deck just naturally counters black.
Yeah, got it. With that, I wanna when we get to the later section, I'm gonna bring up a little bit more about Sabo because it's something I've found specifically that helps generally for players, not all the time, but generally. But we'll go over that. With this, I did want to go first or second. What are your thoughts on going either first or second, or is there ever a choice when we're ever choosing to go first? In this game, if we win the die roll.
Um, no, I don't think there's any matchup there we would rather go first. Against it now, we want to go second because we want to take away Katakuri and 10 cost Ace curve. We want
Okay.
to go second against black decks so they don't play Isho. We want to go second against Bonnie so that we take away, so that we can play Tenkos Kuzan or Isho. Against Nami, we want to go second.
Mm.
Yeah, we want to go second against Nami.
Okay.
Against Reiju, we also want to go second so that they don't Ichiji us.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Against Doffy, we also want to go second so
Yeah.
that they can't just like play Jinbei and call something standing.
Yep. Okay. Got it. Yeah. Okay. Sweet. With that, 20 seconds going to be generally good. With that early game, what are we looking to do when we're setting up the early game?
Okay, so if you're playing the Tenkos Kuzan version, I think something to keep in the back of your mind is this. Even if people swing you early, they will not swing you late. Unless like the guy is a psycho, right?
Yeah.
Like unless the guy is like swing you down to 0, and then he's like, yeah, like unless the guy is a psycho or he doesn't know what Black Yo Luffy does.
Yeah.
Even if people swing you early, once you're at 2 life, like they'll stop touching you. Because then, it's very easy for you to like start engine and awaken.
You'll end up
and
you'll have
spawn.
11 cards in hand, and then you'll just win the game a different way.
Yeah.
So
So even if people swing you start early, just eat it, right? You're playing One Piece. Like your character isn't invincible. You gotta take damage at some point in the game. Just eat it. But
okay.
um, what you want to do in the early game is, I think, turn 3 Sabo is usually like what you want to do, because we've talked about this before. But against decks with removal, you basically are forced to play Sabo on turn 3 so that you have some form of board presence. But if you don't see a Sabo, if you need to slow down the game, you can play like Borsa. Basically, what you want to do in early game is you want to play things that cannot be removed. Like you want to play things that are gonna stay on the board and generate value for you afterwards. Because if you're playing Black Yellow Luffy, people don't swing you. And when people don't swing you, the next question is, how do they generate card advantage if they don't swing you? Like every turn you're basically going +1 because you just don't have to defend against something. So when they can't take cards out of your hand, the next thing that they're gonna try is to take cards off your board. But if they can't take cards off of your board, the only thing that they can do then is to just play something on the board and hope that in the later turns, that thing on the board is going to generate value. But of course, the good thing about BY Luffy is late game you become 9k base. So what happens is usually anything that's played in the early game will never generate value because it just can't touch a 9k base. Which is why to a lot of people, like if your Stabo sticks on the board like for 1 turn, or if your Borsa sticks on the board, like you don't need to swing with these characters. You only tap your characters to swing with them when you want it to die. Like when you're ready to give something up, and the momentum or value that you get from swinging is more than having it getting KO.
Yeah.
So so early to mid game, what you want to do is you just want to try to establish as much consistency as possible. Well, if you really need to see a Sabo, you can play a Searcher. If not, just hold it in your hand. See if you need to find another card at a later turn. Put pressure on your opponent by swinging them, because you can swing them, they can't swing you. And then just play your Sabo, play your 8k Luffy. And then late game is just more in the turns, right? I think the biggest struggle when it comes to people who are playing this deck is just, how do I put myself in a position where I can comfortably start engine next turn, but I'm not in lethal range. That's something that you'll just get better at when as you continue to play this deck. Like if you play against a Doffy and they have a lot of characters on board, like you're gonna have to decide: do I need to rocket Luffy this turn, or would it be better to play a Sabo? And sometimes you do need to guard early and throw a 5k. But what happens is, if people are trying to lethal you on BY Luffy, usually if you just guard the first 2 attacks, like they'll just stop and play something else. So sometimes you do need to concede some resources to start engine. But the benefit is, if you play this list with Borsalino, you're rarely in a position where your opponent can lethal you.
Okay.
So, yeah.
The next section I actually wanted to go over was ending games, but before I do that, I wanted to go over one scenario where I find to be beneficial, so I wanted to see what you thought. In a lot of matchups, especially if your opponent's able to actually establish 1 or 2 big bodies, I find it's very important to usually have 2 blockers, specifically 2 Sabos, at some point. What are your thoughts, at least having 2 Sabos just so you don't lose?
I understand where you're coming from. I think this is kind of common in like an Enel or Lucci matchup, where they play like 2 Morias, and then maybe you haven't started engine, and then you're on like 2 life, or something like that.
Well,
But
I was
I
actually
think it's
saying
very.
we've already started the Moria engine, right? We have like at least 1 Moria
Oh,
down.
we've already started the Moria
Yeah, we may
engine.
have already had a Sabo down, and so we played something
Oh,
Sabo.
okay.
And now we have 2 Sabos, and we always want to keep 2 Sabos so they can't, like, swing 12-12.
Yeah. So usually what happens is like their first. So if you have one Sabo, like I don't think you're ever afraid of 14k because I think you usually have 6k in your hand to block if they go 14k. And then like what happens is if they go all in on that turn, you just kill them the next because you have like Moria, AK, Luffy, and Leader.
Mm-hmm.
But usually what happens is like you'll just get tested with 11k if you have one blocker. So let's say if you play against like Lucci, um like all they're gonna do is play an A drop. So when you play against Lucci and Moria, like you just have to play with the mindset that they will always attach two Dawn to something. Right? So if you like swing with a Sabo, they'll attach it to their leader and they'll clear the Sabo or stuff like that.
Okay.
So usually what happens is they'll always go 11k on the first attack. And if you only have one Sabo, you have to drop two cards from your hand.
Mm.
Because if you counter with the one Sabo, the second 9k is going to go 17k to your face. And then you lose the game. So in those kinds of situations, that yeah, I play two Sabos. But I think it just depends on like you have to be like when you play this deck, you just have to be situationally aware of what is my opponent gonna do. Because there are some times where like let's say if you're playing against an Enel and then they have a 10 cost ace on the field, if you're like really in the end game, and you only play one Sabo, the trade-off that the Enel player makes is if they go 11k to you, it's a guarantee that they're not playing a second 10 cost ace. So they could still play a Yamato, but they're not playing a 10 cost ace. So you're obviously not blocking your Sabo, and you have to give up two cards from your hand. So is it worth for you to play into that turn by dropping two cards in your hand versus your opponent taking a suboptimal turn?
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's just like the trade-off that you make if you want to decide, do I need to play two Sabos or not? But I think like on your second or third Moria turn, usually you're forced to play two Sabos because they'll have like two 9Ks or Katakuri Ace Ace.
Well,
But yeah,
one
in like a more fridge
scenario.
trade.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah?
One scenario I wanted to go over, actually, it seems to be in a lot of my games. I'm drawing 2 or even 3 Morias, luckily. And I'm like, okay, this should be easy. How does my opponent get around this? Do I just keep playing Morias and just keep playing Sabo so I can never lose? And then so my opponent has to literally just keep developing. But when I have 3 Morias in the field, I'm going to kill you after that point.
Yep, pretty much. Pretty much.
Okay.
I think the game, like if you see three Morias, the game kind of plays itself out.
Yeah.
Which is why like
what
black
do you
decks
do?
are being hard carried by Moria.
Yeah, I mean,
But
if you see 3 Morias, like, what do you call? Are you just Saboing like almost every turn, or is it just sometimes Rocket Luffy Sabo just to draw an additional card?
oh, I think it just depends on like if you're getting threatened lethal. Like if you play if you're playing against Lucci and like maybe you're deciding, do I want to play two Sabos or I want to play a Rocket Luffy to KO Rebecca and then accelerate the game? Like is that a common scenario for you?
Yeah, that happens quite often. It just depends if they see a Sabo themselves, right? And a common scenario is actually being at 1 life with a Rocket Luffy already in the life, and then you're cycling Rocket Luffy the first life to put you to 7k, and then you put a Sabo as a second life, so you end the turn with 1 life and a 9k leader. This happens for some reason quite often, which is a little too telling for opponents, right? They can kind of be like, okay, we know this is coming, right? So we can play around it. We can play around the Rocket Luffy a little bit, which isn't great, but also sometimes being a 1 life leader with 9k is also, it's maybe a little overkill in that way.
I think it is. The only matches where I think you need to go 1 life are against Doffy because they have the unblockable event.
Yeah.
And against Perona because Perona just rests your Sabo and then they go for lethal. But I think 9k is overkill because if you put like Rocket Luffy up, it basically telegraphs to your opponent like one of the bodies is going to be a Rocket Luffy. And I don't like telegraphing my opponent what I want to play. I want that flexibility. And I don't think you ever need to go 9k 1 life. The reason why you also don't go 9k 1 life is because like the the resource, like you basically spend one extra resource to keep that card in life, right? Like how you're at 9k 1 life is you could either use an 8k Luffy to pop the card and draw a card, or you've used the Hiyori and you had to like use an extra card to become 9k 1 life. So what happens if you go 9k 1 life, especially in the mirror, I'm just gonna swing your rested Moria instead. Because I'm basically swinging for the same amount of resources, but you have one less card to defend.
Okay.
So I think 9k 1 life is kind of overkill. But going back to like the Sabo question, if I'm not in lethal, I just don't feel the need to play two Sabos. Like again, it's this like question of
Okay.
it's like counting cards and seeing if you can make the trade-off. Like if you play an 8k Luffy and a Sabo, like you're really threatening lethal next game. And even if they take 3 cards out of your hand, if they swing you, chances are if they have to put Dawn to swing and take 3 cards out of your hand while you have a Sabo, they're not developing their board. So next time, if you just swing them and play 2 Sabos, they're probably dead again anyway. So your opponent probably isn't going to like chuck Dawn and just swing you. They probably want to play for a later turn as well, because it's just the more safe play. So yeah.
Okay. God, I just wanted to ask that because lately I've been having the scenarios where I draw even 3 or 4 Gecko Morias. And I'm like, okay, how do I take advantage of this? It seems to me
Okay.
my opponent is setting up for a lethal turn. So,
Okay,
but
if your opponent's setting up for lethal, then yeah, just play Sabos. But
yeah,
I mean, because you're 9k base, you can calc it out pretty easily if they're setting up for lethal, right? Because
yeah,
if you survive a lethal turn after playing 3 Morias, like your opponent's just dead.
yeah. Well, sometimes they may have like some sort of strange backup, right? When it even comes that they already have developed board. So it really depends on the board, especially in the mirror. It can get really funky, right? Like all of a sudden they end up with they end up with like 2 life, but their leader's a 5k. or some strange
Oh,
scenario like this, right? Or their leader's a
yeah, yeah.
7k, right? So and then they went for lethal, they eat your hand up, and you're like, okay, well, I don't really have a surviving turn. I have to go for game, but they have 2 life now, right? And they already have blockers. So there's weird scenarios like that do rarely come up, but it's I guess I'm just trying to see if we do see a lot of Morias, how do we take advantage of that? Because most of the time, I'll even call over. You'll call over Rocket Luffy's because of Moria. Moria is better than Rocket Luffy, right? Most of the time, or sorry,
Yep.
a bit
Yeah,
Punch
for sure,
Luffy,
for sure.
right? And
Yep,
I've
for
even,
sure, for
it's
sure.
funny. I've even had a scenario where I played 3 Morias, but I needed to have that many blockers to guarantee a win against a mirror, and so I had to call over a Moria with a
A
Sabo.
Moria.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I was like, okay, well, you can't win for sure. Even if you like dawn it perfectly, and they're like, yeah, it's pretty tough.
So
So,
actually, like specifically for the mirror,
mm,
your last turn that you want to play before your lethal turn is actually not a Moria turn.
yeah.
You actually want to have like maybe have played 2 Morias. Then what you want to do is you
Mm.
actually want to play 2 Kitsabos so that you can swing 11k 3 times. And then the following turn is where you set up for lethal. So yeah,
Oh,
usually the lethal, like the last turn that you do that you prep for is um transforming twice with Kitsabos and then having like 4 extra Dawn just to swing and take more
I
resources off.
like that. I think that sounds. I mean, it sounds just better regardless, because that you're not wasting cards on board most of the time in that
Yep.
scenario, right? Where you have to call call a sub over a Gecko Moria. So in that scenario, but I guess we'll see how that goes. Okay, got. But generally with ending games, I know we talked a lot about Sabo, just this end game portion, right? Ending games we're essentially building board, trying never to lose, right? And then eventually, we're swinging for 9-11s every single turn and setting
Yeah.
up for some sort of lethal scenario, especially, if their little blockers don't mean anything if you're able to actually Rocket Luffy them out if you have like a small Luffy in hand, right? So
Yep.
um okay.
They really don't. Like there's no deck in the game that survives 8k, 9k, 9k, 11k.
Yeah, there isn't. Okay. With that, I actually would love to go into matchups We can go as detailed as you like. With that, the first matchup I'd love to go into is actually the mirror. How should we be approaching the mirror matchup? I know we've brought up a lot during this segment, but what should we be looking forward to curve out and maybe win the game?
Yeah. So like in general, right? Turn three Sabo for sure. If you have Isho, you play Isho. And then afterwards your late game is basically you're trying to play you're you're trying to play the first 9k that your opponent. Because like again, um basically you have to think of it as if I have a 9k on board, it gets one more card than my opponent every turn. So I'm just playing like one turn ahead. So
Yeah.
if I can actually play Isho and I can play Moria before my opponent plays their Moria, I'm two 9Ks ahead, and I think I just win the game at that point.
Mhm.
So the mirror is basically in it's basically turn three Sabo guaranteed so that you don't lose to some like finger gun or the yellow Sabo out of
Yeah.
nowhere. And then basically where possible, you want to start your engine and Moria right after, and you want to play the first Moria. If you cannot play the first Moria, your general mid game plan is just to play bodies on the board to threaten lethal. So, if your opponent plays AK Luffy and they want to go down to like 2 life, then, you know, have a board that will basically forces them to start engine the next turn.
Mhm.
Or like it puts them in an awkward spot. Like if I don't start engine, then I have to guard one attack next turn, or I'm forced to start engine.
Yeah. Got it. And
But uh
yeah, I can see that, right? So if you have like two big bodies already and they're at 2 life, you might threaten 3 attacks, even if they have a blocker. So they have to take 2 attacks and then block out the third
yeah,
one. So they lose out some
yeah.
value, or should we even be more patient than that?
I think generally if you have I will only threaten lethal if I have two more attacks. If they have to guard 2 attacks from their hand.
Okay. If they
And
have
I
at
think those
some point
scenarios
give
don't come
support.
up very often.
Okay. Yeah, they don't. I feel
Yeah.
like most of the time if they're at 2 life, I have 3 attacks, but they have a blocker. They just take block, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? So that's why we also play Borsalino, because like again it's just like it's like a building block card. Like if we don't see the Sabo, our Borsa like comes in to fill that placement. But yeah,
Mhm.
generally these scenarios I don't feel they happen often because your opponent always has a Sabo. So
Yeah.
so actually I know we said we don't play the ace version, but you can imagine that if you're playing a mirror where both of you are expecting Isho, Ace actually has a use case scenario
Okay.
because Ace can actually threaten a lethal turn. So
Okay.
it's funny because this is actually a matchup where Ace would be helpful.
Mhm.
Um, but I think it's still fine if you play Isho because um now if you're expecting your opponent plays Isho, you have to swing them. And then if they're expecting you play Isho, they have to swing you.
Yeah.
And then it just becomes like it becomes a battle of just starting your engine and playing more at first.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Because
I
if
do
they have to
think
start the engine, you can't really play Isho and do engine. It's not possible. So
yes, exactly. But I do think that if you're going second, you're perfectly fine with giving up early aggression if you have Isho in hand. Because you're just gonna call Isho afterwards.
okay.
Like if you're going second, I don't think you need to worry about lethal. Because if they have Isho and you have Isho,
Mhm.
you play the first Isho. And I think that's perfectly fine.
Okay.
Because you play Isho, and if they Isho you afterwards, you just play Sabo. And the other thing is, if you have Isho,
Mhm.
so 4-cost Kuzan is actually better in this matchup as well. Because if
Yeah.
they play Isho and 4-cost Kuzan swings, they can rocket Luffy afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But the thing is, the 4-cost Kuzan has to swing, and then they have to play Rocket Luffy. So the
Yeah.
problem with that is if your solution to Isho is to swing with 4-cost Kuzan, you allow the person who played Isho to start engine, and the Isho has already taken 2 cards from your hand.
Yeah.
So while you get rid of the Isho, I don't think 4-cost Kuzan is like, that great into it
It's not. Plus,
either.
most of the time, you if they have a 4 cost Kuzan, if you can, Rocket Luffy is gonna be a great card just to get rid of it. It's not the
Yeah,
best,
exactly. And
but it
if
might be
you're
better to
going
play the
second
Isho.
and you have exactly. Because if you're going second and you have the Isho in hand and you're ready to play it, then they're swinging you because they're trying to play around Isho. But you get to play the first Isho, so you don't really care.
Yeah. It's kind of it's kind of funny. Yeah. Okay, got it. And then again, an in-game scenario you did bring up that's pretty interesting, right? You're saying something about two Gecko Morias and then doing a setting up turn where you swing 11, 11, 11, and then play down two little Sabos to get just two blockers on board, and then the follow-up turn then winning the game is ideal, right?
Yep. Yeah. So I mean, usually after you like play a couple of Morias, the thing is, when you're playing the mirror, like a Moria turn is easily mapped out. Like 9k, 9k, they throw one card, one card.
Yeah.
But usually in the endgame where there are like 6 or 5 cards and stuff like that, what you can do is you can actually just go. So let's say like if you have 2 Morias on the or like 3 Morias on the board, what you can do is you can go 11k first, and then they'll probably throw 2 cards from their hand or they'll block with a Sabo. But what you want to do is the turn before you go for lethal is it's what you want to do is you're aiming for playing 2 Kid Sabos and then having an extra 4 down to chuck under Moria. Because what this does is it takes more cards out of your opponent's hand right before the lethal turn, rather than just going play a Moria and then swing, swing, swing. So you can imagine that if your opponent has like 5 cards and then you take another 2 and you get rid of 2 Sabos, next turn when they draw, if they start engine, they'll only have 2 cards left in their hand if they play Sabo.
Yeah.
And then like from there it's just like a matter of just mathing your opponent out.
Yeah. And sometimes your opponents, they get really greedy and they have a couple Gecko Warriors in hand and they can't even guard out of those 11k swings. They have to just literally block, right? And they'll be in like an even worse spot in my experience. I'm sure that maybe happened to you guys at some point where, oh, I need to keep these Morias, and all of a sudden you have too many Morias in hand and they actually test your hand, right? We're like, oh, maybe I should have ditched that with Sabo. Maybe I didn't need 4 of them back to back, but
yeah, maybe you need 4 Morias back to back.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of an interesting thought of mathing out what your opponent can do. I guess I wanted to bring up in a scenario where we're not so lucky. We only see like 1 Moria. We have kind of an engine going, but we did have like a big Luffy out. Are we just looking to like activate engine with the small guys and then hopefully lethal the turn after that one? Because I feel like that's the scenario most people hit themselves with. They don't even see a Moria in the first place. They have to awaken and not see a Moria, or they do see 1 Moria but only 1.
So if you only see 1 Moria, usually what I want to call with that 1 Moria is I want to call 1 AK Luffy and 1 Sabo, because you need the Sabo to tank a hit next turn. But you want to call the AK Luffy because to claw back into this game, you need to put some form of pressure. And if you don't put some form of pressure, like you'll just lose the game.
Yeah.
So at the very least, play 8k Luffy, so that if you use 6 Dawn to transform kids next turn, you'll at least have 4 Dawn to put somewhere. So you can even start with like Gecko Moria 11k, because usually what happens is if it's early, like if it's the first Moria turn, your opponent will probably only play 1 kid, 1 Sabo, because they're expecting you to play another Moria, right? So they probably won't play 2 Sabos. So you can go 11k, and he will probably guard from his hand because he's not gonna take like an 18k to the face potentially, or your leader will just go 11k anyway. So he'll at least get 2 cards from a hand, and then after that you can at least like smack with Luffy and you can swing 11k leader. So even though you don't play Moria, which kinda sucks, you will at least get 3 cards from your opponent's hand, which you're at least progressing the game.
Okay. All right. Okay. So at least we're progressing the game. All right. Wait, any other like thoughts, tips for the mirror?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the mirror is a great expression of skill. It's just you just need to manage when to go for lethal and when to like concede. Yeah, I'm just not punching. Like, there's no way I'm punching this guy through a Boa and a Sabo.
Yeah.
So I need to shift gears my next strat is just to play the first Moria.
Okay. Ah, right. With that, the next matchup I wanted to go over is actually Bonnie, the most detailed one where we have to, it's a
Yeah.
hardest matchup possible. What are your thoughts on facing Bonnie? What should we be looking to do turn by turn by turn?
Okay, so I think we briefly talked about this in the deck list too, but we'll
Mhm.
go over it again. Like let's first establish what Bonnie is gonna do. Worst case scenario, Bonnie plays Searcher turn 1, or like Searcher with turn 1, Searcher turn 2, or Roche turn 2.
Mhm.
Then they play Cavendish, they play Hawkins, they play Hody Jones, and then they play Zoro, right?
Yeah.
Nightmare curve. Okay. Um so there's two approaches to Bonnie. The first is this Tenkos Kuzan build where if they play a searcher early, well, you swing the searcher so they don't get any more value. And then basically on your 4 down turn you play Borsa, and from then on you just like never swing ever again.
Okay. Never swinging
So
again.
on their 5 down turn, if they play Cavendish and then they'll swing you 7k just to like test the water, you take it, you go to 2 life, and then here play a Sabo again, and then you pass back to them. If they Hody Jones your board here, I don't think it's that bad because you just need to guard with like 2k, 2k, 1k. And you can let something die, but you can protect one, and because they've swung you early game, you have cards to protect it.
Mhm.
And then next turn you just like you play Rocket Luffy and then you jam the Cavendish. And then they can't play uh 9 cost Zoro after that because they have to get rid of Rocket Luffy. So if they don't see a second Hody Jones, you're pretty good. So what usually happens is instead on their 7 down turn, if they went first, they'll probably play a Hawkins. And then on their 9 down turn, they have a choice between playing 9 cost Zoro or Hody Jones if they need to like hit the board. Right? So that's usually the Bonnie curve.
Mhm.
If you're playing the Tenkos Kuzan version, what you do is basically once you start playing things on the board, you just never swing Bonnie because you never want Bonnie to rest your characters and swing your characters.
Mhm.
Because in general, Bonnie isn't going to swing you past 2 life. And plus, they think you're on Tenkos Kuzan, but you could also be on Ice Age. If they swing you to 0 and you just like start your engine, then they just put you on Ice Age for free. Right? So
Mhm.
if they set up a Cavendish and you respond with a Sabo and then they play a Hawkins, usually before their Zoro turn, you're forced to play Rocket Luffy because if you don't play Rocket Luffy here, and they play 9 cost Zoro, even if you play 10 cost Kuzan, it's too late because the 9 cost Zoro would have already like stayed a turn, and then they can just like tap the 9 cost Zoro, and then they can play 8 cost Kid, play Rosinante, and the 9 cost Zoro will never die. So you need to play Rocket Luffy before the 10 cost Kuzan
Okay.
turn, which is also a weakness of the 10 cost Kuzan version. Like you're trading off, like you have to do this large amount of setup, but if it works, you just like straight up win the game.
Yeah.
So, which is why you're playing like Borsas and Sabos. You're trying to make it so that it's hard for the Bonnie player to lethal you, and they have to see Hody Jones. Otherwise, like, just slap 10 cost cooldown, and then you're like chilling.
Yeah.
So that's your 10 cost Kuzan curve. You need to like play blocker, you need to play Rocket Luffy before the 10 cost Kuzan, and 10 cost Kuzan.
Okay.
And the trade off is if you play Rocket Luffy and then they think, oh, I can't drop 9 cost Zoro here, and then they have to play Hody Jones and then they swing your board. If you can protect your board and you slam 10 cost Kuzan down, you instantly KO Cavendish and you instantly KO Hody Jones.
Okay.
And next turn they can't threaten lethal on you, right? And even if you do give up your board, if you can drop 10 cost Kuzan and your blocker survives and you KO Cavendish, they can't lethal you again. And then next turn you can just like start your engine and do whatever you want. So that's the curve for the 10 cost Kuzan version.
Okay. Yeah. And then I know you brought up the other version a little bit. So I guess it's just a little bit more flexible. You want to see the Ice Age, right? And you can play a more normal version. I know Isho is going to be very obnoxious for them as well. But if we're able to Ice Age just and then Rocket Luffy any of their big hosts and just play our normal game plan. But I guess, is this a very patient matchup where we don't I mean obviously we're playing cards just not swinging because they're just going to rest our blockers and kill our blockers, right?
So if you're playing this list, it's actually the exact opposite of the previous list.
Okay.
So with this list, you're actually not looking for Sabo. You're looking for 8k Luffy on curve.
Okay.
Because you're gonna keep smacking them with 8k Luffy.
Okay.
And then the turn after 8k Luffy, you're gonna play Isho. So this is why we can't play 10 cost Kuzan in this version. Because we need to go to 8k so that Luffy doesn't get swung back. But the benefit of this version is because I don't need to set up with Rocket Luffy before the 10 cost Kuzan, I don't need to play as many copies of Rocket Luffy, and I can instead play more copies of Isho. Because I can actually just Isho on my 8 Dawn turn or 9 Dawn turn instead. And then on my 10 Dawn turn, if they drop Zoro, then I'll just Ice Age them. Now, the trade-off of this is I need to see as many Ice Age as they do Zoro. So, and also there's an argument that if you're 8k base and if you're 8k punch Luffy and you swing them every single turn, they might not get a window to play the second Zoro without feeling threatened. But I disagree with that because if they see 2 searchers early game and you swing their life, they just get infinite resource. If you swing the searcher, you don't swing their life. And then if they play like a Hawkins or like Uroge, there's like almost no way that you threaten the Bonnie to a lethal position where they don't just have a window to play 2 9 plus Zoros. So I'm not a fan of the idea that I can just punch the Bonnie player enough that they can't drop the second Zoro. I think they always can.
Yeah, it's impossible if they see searchers because a searcher is a blocker.
Yes. Unless you just ignore the searcher and you hit them. But that's also terrible because if they play Cavendish, they just have infinite resource.
Yeah.
So with this version, the benefit of this is you can play a more on-tempo version. Like you can still swing the Bonnie. And then you can play Isho on the curve. And Isho is never going to get swung back because it's a 9k base. But you may have to draw multiple copies of Ice Age, whereas in the 10 cost Kuzan version, you only need to see 1.
Yeah, of the Kuzan. Okay, got it. So it's a different trade-off. Definitely play around with that, guys. Especially, I'm sure with how popular Bonnie is at your locals, you're gonna see a lot of Bonnie. They don't mind testing against a good matchup. So
yeah, I'll be Bonnie this week when the ban list like starts for us over here, and I'm not looking forward to it.
Yeah, exactly. But this deck's pretty good against other things. So we're actually going to jump into that next matchup, actually, is Rob Lucci. And I do want to do a big thing. Rob Lucci has always been very popular in 07. And honestly, probably just, I think it's one of the more powerful decks. Even in a scenario where there's a lot of Black Yellow Luffys, they either say, we're going to tech super hard for it and win it maybe 30% of the time if they play correctly, which, it's kind of our attitude also against Bonnie, right? In a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But the great thing is that deck can kind of fold on itself because it doesn't run a whole lot of counter, but they do have a lot of options, which I'll go over here in a second. And I guess, there's not really a whole lot to play around other than a lot of them are going to be playing a whole lot of number 1, the Nightmare Luffy. This is actually very popular here, where they'll just sit on this forever. And if you're able to remove this on curve, it is pretty powerful. It's kind of hard to remove because it is a 5 cost. You actually have to see 10 drop Kuzan, which isn't that great against this matchup. Or if you see Isho into removing this, most of the time I just actually ignore this card. And when they finally swing with it, I just attack it because it should die in that scenario. Or a lot of them are playing a ton of Brook. They're actually mixing between Brook and Luffy. This card's very popular here. I'll tell you right now. This card is extreme. You will see this at Nationals.
I see.
Because it trashes 4 costs, and they're going to be trashing your Gecko Morias with an Ice Age. They're going to be trashing your big Luffys. Most of the time, it's going to be like a Sabo, and then they're going to be waiting a turn. And this card's going to be pretty good against Borsellino, so I do want to at least make sure that you're aware of that. It seems that you're a little surprised by this right now. Well, what are your thoughts knowing this?
I don't think this card is good.
It is played, though.
The reason I've seen it get played. But I don't think this card is good because So it goes back to like BY Luffy. It goes back to this idea of when you establish like a lot of like when you play three things on your board in one turn,
Uh,
and you're putting so much pressure on your opponent. You're basically asking your opponent, how are you gonna deal with this board? Now, if your opponent's idea to deal with this board is they play a Brook, they trash your Sabo, and then they swing you 13k Moria, like they take three cards out of your hand, but
yeah.
next turn you're swinging them 8k, 9k, 11k, play Moria, and then play two Sabos. So this sounds like a terrible trade-off, right? Um, and then so like late game, I
Yeah.
think the Lucci player usually doesn't have a window to play Brook,
Not
simply
late game.
because they need to play another Moria to bring back a Borsa or Rebecca, or they need to play Rebecca Sabo to like stay alive. Mid and early game, I also don't like this card because um it follows the same idea of if your opponent ever puts down like 6k cards on the field in early game, they're just cards that you will net like
You're never
it's just a
swinging it.
card that your opponent has lost, and once you go 9k, like it never matters to you, right?
Yeah.
So yes, if they KO, like if they trash a Sabo, sure, I'll be sad that I can't swing with the Sabo 7k when I like transform. But I don't think it's the end of the world. Like it doesn't impact my game plan of at the end of the day, I'm just gonna swarm you and I'm gonna beat you down.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. I mean, I'm just saying that a lot of people are playing this on curve. So when they get to their 8, 9
As
dawn turns, if they hopefully see Isho, and some of them are playing Isho, some of them aren't, they're like so mixed on it. When they finally do play a Moria to have that kind of pressure, it does leave us a little vulnerable at times. But I mean, most of the time in my scenario, they win just because they Rebecca Sabo, Rebecca Sabo, Rebecca Sabo after they play
yeah,
their first Moria,
exactly.
which is
Like
really hard. So
yeah, I've only lost my BY games when so like I when I play against Lucci and I go first, I swing them 8k on turn two every single time. Because I have this nightmare in my head that if I swing them 7k, they counter with 2k and a Sabo. And then on 4 dawn, they play Rebecca, grab the Sabo. Then when I swing them next turn, they block with Rebecca, and then they play Sabo. And then they'll block with Sabo again, and then they'll play Isho afterwards, and then they'll still be at 5 life, which like sounds terrible. But I've had it happen to me before, and I think that's the only way like you really beat BY. If you just see blocker, blocker, Isho, and then Moria call blocker, Moria call blocker. But yeah, I'm not afraid of like Brook because if you're playing a Brook, you're not playing a Sabo, and I'm just gonna swing you every turn.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. Got it. I just wanted to at least bring that up as that's gonna be seen. Especially
Mm.
if we do Borsellino on curve, it might be a little funny, but like,
Yeah.
um,
If you're for Dawn, do not play Borsalino on curve. Like just swing the Lucci player.
oh really? To swing 9? Okay.
Yeah, just swing nine. Like every attack you swing on the Lucci player, you
Yeah.
want it to take like two cards out of their hand.
Yeah.
The
And
faster the Lucci player goes to 2 life, is the
yeah.
faster that they cannot play 9k bodies because they have to play Rebecca Sabo.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Got it. One other thing that's kind of interesting too. People fall into this problem sometimes against like other decks. They'll play down like a Garp and they'll swing 5k with their leader and then 5k with Garp or 6k with Garp. It's not good against leaders that actually do things like milling 2 cards
Yeah.
from their trash is really broken in that deck. And then actually, if they can never like add cards from their deck to their trash without, damaging you, right? Then it actually really hurts them over time.
Yeah.
But if this is rested, they're just gonna like laugh at you, right? Maybe in other matchups, like I can't think of one right now. Like blue, this is a little better, right? But maybe not. Maybe not actually. There's weird scenarios where these things come up, but it kind of breaks one of
But
the
in
rules
general,
you
it's always
said.
better to just swing 7k. Like just swing 7k. The faster you
Hmm.
threaten their life, the less time they have to play big
Okay,
bodies.
got it. I think that's a good way to bring it up. Okay, got it. So again, just to kind of go over the matchup, we are pressuring them down to 2 life as quick as possible. while also developing board. You're gonna get Sabos down, right? And then just do our normal curve of
Yeah.
hopefully awakening ourselves into Moria, and then they're only out to seeing Rebecca Sabo back to back to back.
Usually, yeah. That's like the
In those
high roll of the
scenarios.
deck, right?
Well,
In
yeah.
like 12 cards, you see blocker, blocker, Moria, Moria.
Okay. God, yeah. I mean, you guys are going to be seeing this deck. You're probably going to break and lose to this deck once in a while, right? But it's probably going to be
Yeah.
one of the more popular decks because I have a lot of friends that just refuse to actually drink the black yellow Luffy Kool-Aid, and they
Yeah,
decide just to
yeah.
deal with the matchup, which it's kind of masochistic, but you know, it's they chose this line. So with that, make sure you guys punish that line as much as you can. With that, the next matchup I want to go over, it's going to be more popular at 8.5, but you're going to be seeing it a little bit in set 8 and 7.5 a little bit as well, is actually Blue Doflamingo. We can go over Boa in maybe like a later segment or maybe in this video, but Blue Doflamingo, what are your thoughts on how to countering this deck? Or really, we're just, it seems like we're just playing around pudding for the most part. Um, and Raging
Yeah,
Tiger,
we are.
but go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I actually was just playtesting this deck a friend yesterday
Mhm.
because we expect Doffy to be one of, if not the best deck in the format in OP9, simply because it looks to be the best aggro deck after the ST support. But yeah, when you play against the deck, obviously we're trying to play around putting, you never get a chance to play Tenkos Kuzan, but I've always had a window to play Isho. Like, I actually love Isho in the Blue Doffy matchup because the Blue Doffy deck just cannot get rid of 9k bodies unless they see multiple red rock. But
Mhm.
again, it's like an unsearchable, so you can't play around everything, but they need to see red rock for Isho, and you at least get rid of one before you like start playing your Morias and stuff like that. So Isho 9k body, like just big bodies, Doffy has a pretty hard time getting around them. But other than that, I think the card that you actually want to see the most in this matchup is 8k Luffy. The reason why you want 8k Luffy is because um when you're playing against a Doffy player, and okay, so this is actually like a tip for Doffy players and a
Yeah.
tip for everyone playing against BY. When you're swinging lethal against BY, you swing 6k instead of 5k. And you swing
Okay.
6k because the BY player has to decide. See, if they throw a 2k, it's a card that they can't use to
To
like
awaken.
take their life anyway.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's very awkward for them because sometimes they only like they need the 2k to start the engine, but if they take that 6k, they're gonna have to end up guarding more than 2k.
Yeah.
So that's why you sing 6k against BY.
Okay.
So the reason why you want 8k Luffy as like out of all of the other adults, the first thing you want on the board is 8k Luffy is because um when your opponent swings you 6k, 8k Luffy makes it so that you need one less 2k in your hand on
Yeah.
the turn you want to start your engine. So you can actually safely use the 2k to block the first attack.
Okay.
And then like the blue Doffy player isn't gonna swing you like past 2 life anymore. So having 8k Luffy on board is one less 2k that you need on the turn you start your engine. And then it's also an 8k body that like your opponent's just like never going to reasonably clear
Yeah,
on their
they
turn.
can only use an event to get rid of that, and Boa Hancock is
Yeah,
useless against
exactly.
this card. Um,
Exactly. So when I play against blue decks in general, especially against Doffy, the first card that I want is AK Luffy.
mhm.
And then after that, when I play against Doffy and aggro decks, like I just want to keep recycling Luffy.
Yeah.
I the first turn that you transform, you want to be 7k against Doffy so that you can go 9k one life on the next turn. But you just want to keep cycling Rocket Luffys.
Mhm.
You don't really need to play a Sabo because you don't need to have like 2 bodies on the board because you then just lose the Raging Tiger. But sometimes it's okay because you just ask your opponent, do you want a Raging Tiger 2 things? And next turn I play a Moria. And basically they're playing catch up with you, or like would you rather give them the opportunity to play like a 10 drop Kuzan? Sorry,
Yeah.
10 drop Kaido.
Kaido, yeah. You're putting him in a scenario, and they can't Raging Tiger and pudding you, right? And
Yes,
this,
exactly.
and then we
So you
kind of
want to
brushed
set
over
yourself up
pudding a
for
little
the
bit because I mean every blue deck is playing at least 3 pudding now, right?
yeah.
Especially if they're expecting to see BY Luffy, that's going to be like their main goal, and we can't really play around Raging Tiger, but we do have some things that I think are pretty good against pudding. And in my scenario, like I do like actually playing down sabos at a good point, right, to in order to fill my trash up. And on top of that, I remember you brought this up, and this is what I do all the time now. I play these little bodies, Luffy's and Sabos early. So I mean I already have them out, so it's actually good value for later. But they are usually only going to Raging Tiger like your Luffy's and your Sabos. And it even makes things like your Rocket Luffy really good because they can't Raging Tiger a Rocket Luffy because it's already off the field, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, because it feels like half the time I'm actually playing around having 7 or 8 cards in hand. So you're not giving them insane
You
value with
are.
it. And if you're able to fill up your trash a little bit with some of these cards like Rocket Luffy or maybe even like a Sabo, then you're going to be in a better spot later when they do pudding you and you have to awaken and do things, because now you actually have a trash to call out like 5 costs, because that ends up being like the biggest breaking scenario where you don't have any 5 costs at all, right, to call out.
Yes.
But that's like my main scare, I think, is everyone's scare is pudding. They have to strictly play around pudding. And
Yes.
so it
So
makes it a
far,
little awkward.
I've actually had less of a problem with pudding and more of a problem with Raging Tiger.
Really?
Like,
Huh?
if you counter early, I don't think you need to be worried about pudding. And like, if they don't swing you, then you just play stuff on the board because like you'll basically lose to Raging Tiger or pudding. So you
Yeah.
just play your kids and then you put your opponent in this spot where if you pudding me, you're not developing your board,
Yeah.
and whatever threat I have on the board stays there. But if you Raging Tiger me, I'm just gonna do the same thing to you again next turn. So that's like the spot that you wanna aim to put your opponent in.
Yeah.
Also, it's nice that you mentioned like playing Sabo and discarding adults, because that's true. But it also reminds me there is a very high roll ceiling with Sabo. So just for anyone, and this is also in the Lucci matchup.
Yeah.
If you see 2 Sabos and you have a Hiyori and a Kid Sabo in your hand,
Yeah.
you can actually play the first Sabo, drop the Hiyori and the Kid, and then you can play Moria, call back the Hiyori and the Kid. And then, yeah, so on your 8 on turn, you can actually bring out the Moria and then Adult and go 7 Kid.
Yeah, exactly. I could be a 7K leader with that scenario.
Yep.
One thing I think is very important for any 7 Warlord Blue matchup is playing around Femur. If you actually end the turn with 0 life, you're going to lose if they see Femur and they all play at least 1 now because of this scenario. And it's actually almost better to be a 7K leader with a couple blockers, even if they have a wide board, because you're just going to lose to a 15K swing anyway, if that's the case.
Exactly.
So I recommend guys out there, like, try to set up maybe on like the turn before you Moria, like a Hiyori, and put yourself either at 1, or if you could like really, this is actually even crazier, at 2 life and like a 7K leader, so you're always at 9K. Like you can really mess around with that a whole lot, guys. If you have enough 5-drop bodies in order to afford that. That's kind of like actually the hard part. All of a sudden, when they start Raging Tigering you, you don't have enough 5 drops in order to even get to 2 life.
Yeah.
You have to start calling over them with your
It
Morias in that kind of scenario. But whatever you do, never end the turn with 0 life, even if you have like 3 blockers out, because they can just Femur it, right? And so it's unblockable. That's kind of like my main thought, because it's kind of hard for them most of the time. They play around with this playing 10-drop Kaido, but if they play 10-drop Kaido, you're putting them in such a lethal spot. It's gonna cost them 5 cards in order to
Exactly.
guard out of any of these attacks, because the turn after they play the 10-drop Kaido, you're probably going to be like, okay, I'll swing Luffy, combo out, swing Moria, use leader, and then become a 9k again with the blocker, right? So,
Exactly.
and
So
then,
yeah, I'm usually never able to just like early game. I find that I'm never able to put enough pressure on Doffy just because it's a 5 life leader. But
yeah.
like once you start playing a couple 9k bodies, like Doffy just crumbles. Like they have no way of getting rid of 9k bodies.
Mhm.
If they red rock you and you're at 9k base, you're like cool. Next time I'm just gonna punch you with Luffy, punch you with 11k leader, and then develop board again.
Yeah, Red Rock's kind of a bait here, in my opinion, for them. Right? It's actually almost a bad card half the time in blue. Um, so yeah, I can see that quite often happening. Okay, great. I think we covered that. Is there any changes for like Boa? You would say, like I know they don't go as wide, but I think their game plan is still pretty similar.
Yeah, I actually think the Boa matchup is harder than
Yeah,
uh the the Doffy matchup just because they max out on all the events and they have more top end, and if they have like two 10 cost Kaidos, like the game is
yeah.
pretty hard. Against Boa it's actually I think it's like a 40-60 matchup. But again, you won 8k Luffy.
Mm.
You kind of follow the same game plan as Doffy. But where possible, because they usually don't have a whiteboard, so their board's pretty weak. The early game is just like removal. You want to just swing them hard, because like Boa is a vanilla if she's not 5 cards in hand. So just swing them hard and make it like really awkward for them, where like they have to drop like a huge amount of cards if they want to activate leader's ability.
Yeah, yeah. I have the same advice against Reiju. Right, early in the game, you'll swing large at them, so they have a huge hand, so they can't activate little Reiju.
And
Right?
activate Raiju.
Yeah, because you have to have too many cards in hand. That's a very annoying thing when I'm
I
playing Reiju.
see, I see.
And that was a case if they ever just swung 8 at me on their first turn. I was like, well, now I go to like 8 cards in hand and I can't use little Reiju. And so it's kind of the same thing with them. They can't actually activate their skill and draw cards because all of a sudden they're stuck at like 7 or more cards in hand as Boa, right? Um, and that fits within our prerogative, right? We don't want to go wide with like swinging 5/5s. We want to swing 8s and 9s, so they have to give
You
us
want to
two
put pressure.
2Ks, right? So, but that's actually the big benefit of playing blue. You can just like give them 2 2Ks in these
You
scenarios,
can as well. Yep,
but
yep.
they I will say that this is one of those decks. Bo's one of those decks that has a lot of non counter cards. Even though they have a lot of counter cards, they have also a lot of
They
non
do,
counter
yeah,
cards.
yeah. They play like 4 10 cost Kaidos, and then they play what 11 events.
11 events. They play 4 boas. They play they play a whole
Yeah,
slew of stuff that is ends up
yep.
being really vulnerable randomly. Even though they're playing a shit ton of 2Ks, they don't
Yeah.
play like enough blockers. Where I think like even playing like 1-drop blockers would be really good in that deck, in my opinion. Because they can get their
Maybe,
hands
yeah.
down. But it's a weird thing. It's kind of a weird scenario. But it's not a matchup you're going to see quite a lot. But you're definitely going to want to make sure you guys stay at like 1 life at some points, and you can even be like a 7k leader against them because that sounds really greedy, but it's not that greedy if they're never going to be able to swing 7k at you and use an ability. So
Yes.
yeah. The next matchup I'd like to go over is actually Enel. Enel is kind of a
Okay.
consistency monster, and in my opinion, right? But it's to give you a little brief thing on Enel in the US. A lot of people actually don't like playing Enel against Red Purple Law, but it was really popular. At first, it was really good against it in people's opinion, but there were just way too many good Red Purple Law players at like California events
Oh,
and such. And so these yellow Enel players that I was working with that were like really good at Enel, they'd be like, yeah, if a Red Purple Law knows what they're doing, they will beat me 99% of the time. If they were really good, and that ended up being like a lot of Californians were just really good with that scenario. And they sometimes would just never win. you know, Enel is still a consistency monster and can do things. But what are your thoughts on us facing Enel now?
So, I think exactly the same as what we said in our previous video. I think a lot of the matchups in the previous video don't really change.
Hmm.
So against Enel, we're pretty much doing the same thing. And so just to reiterate to, anyone new, you do want to swing Enel, like you just want to punch them because basically Enel's never punching you, but if you don't punch them, both of you are playing the staring game, and the staring game doesn't work for you. The staring game doesn't work for you
Okay.
because if they play 10 cost ace over and over and over again, they will eventually just out trade you. So what you want to do is you want to swing them to 1, and you want to like put up a wide board so that you will basically ask them, if you want to katakuri my board in order to like delay this game, then I'm just gonna use my whiteboard to pressure you because you're at 1 life.
Okay.
So that's how you play around like multiple categories. Because like people have told me that like I struggle against it now because they just see like multiple category and I can never punch them. What you
Mhm.
want to do is you just want to go wide, which is why you want to play Sabo first, followed by like 8K Luffy and stuff like that.
Okay.
The benefit of this deck is you also just play Isho. I think random discard is like one of the most
Yeah.
unfun mechanics in the game. I've
Yeah.
I've Isho discarded an Isho discarded a Moria before, and it's just like,
Yeah.
what did I get rewarded for? I got rewarded for rolling a dice, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but now that we play Isho, the now matchup is like even better if it was not already great. And so
Mhm.
and people might also say, oh, but they'll just katakuri my Isho. Yes, but that's a katakuri that would have been used on your adult
Mhm.
instead. So now they need to see 2 katakuris,
Yeah.
right?
It's pretty
So
tough. And then you
yeah,
can also, I mean, I guess the only other thing they have is using the 6-drop event, but it's kind of ended up being really funny. They end up like having this scenario where they have all these cards in their hand, but you can't just rip out both of them or one of them with this. And it's just value, regardless of if you get the card you're looking for. Minusing 2 cards from their hand and then they have to put this card to your life is just pure value, where eventually
yeah,
you're just going to, uh big Luffy, the 8K Luffy, the Isho out of your life anyway at some point,
yeah,
right?
exactly, right? So
So
I'm
you're
not
actually
losing a
drawing a
card.
card. You're drawing a card because they gave you a
Yeah,
card in your life.
exactly. Like it's so stupid. But yeah, again, we talked about this. Like, if
Mhm.
you're afraid of Raigo that kills Tenkuzan, don't be. You like both of you just traded a turn. That's basically it. Like
Mhm.
both of you lost a card in your hand, and then you top decked another card in your hand. Like literally nothing has changed in the game except that you've forced your opponent to have Raigo or be in a terrible position, and
Yeah.
like that's basically it.
Okay.
So yeah, like against Enel, the game plan is just put them to 1, play a whiteboard, start your engine, and then go for game. And
Yeah.
you want to start your engine ideally after the first Yamato or after the first ace, because you don't want them to get too many big bodies out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, their scenario, they would prefer to get 2 aces out and then swing 14-14 at your leader. Um which just asks you for 2 blockers essentially, right? Which might be too tough,
Yeah,
or a blocker and a 6K counter, which is too expensive at that point. So you need to actually people need to braven up a little bit. And I have tried this whole starving scenario for Enel, like putting him at 3 life or 2 life. And because I'm playing around them Raigoing my Luffy early in the game, because I usually play Luffy on curve, and I found that there's probably a better setup for this than this because it wasn't working out as good as I thought it would be. Um,
yeah. If they see like multiple katakuri, they're just like chilling.
yeah, exactly. And then they don't even care to Raigo you anymore. At that point, they just play
Yeah,
Katakuris and then swing tall,
exactly.
and then you're just kind of out of the game because you just didn't attack them, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay, got it. Yeah, and Nell is interesting. An interesting matchup I did want to at least brief over for even set 8 or 7.5 is actually Vegapunk. I'm sure it's gotten popular in
Oh,
Japan and things like this. I have a feeling the matchup really shouldn't be
okay.
that bad for this, but go ahead. What are your thoughts on Vegapunk matchup?
I see. Well, first of all, I'm the only one playing this deck here,
Yeah.
so I think that speaks about how bad the deck is. Basically, okay. So if everyone is here following the Japan CS Vegapunk hype,
Yeah.
it's very simple why Vegapunk I think it was top 4 in CS. And
Yeah.
the reason for that is simply because of the '08 meta. Like that's literally it. The '08 meta at the time was RP Law, and then Lucci and BR was kind of popular too. But in Japan, RP Law is very, very, very popular.
Yeah.
And then there's also Blue Doffy players. Vegapunk is great into like mid-range aggro decks that play small 4-cost, 5-cost creatures.
Yeah.
Like that's where Vegapunk shines. Like it just eats up those decks. Like you just control the board early with Rocket Luffy, with Nami. Late game you play Yamato, and then once you have like 3 things on the board, you just like swing everything in
Yeah.
one turn. And then your opponent is forced to respond.
Yeah, it's a different
But
flavor of Enel, right? Of that
yeah,
kind of strategy.
exactly. I like to think of it as Enel 2.0 in '09 because Enel loses to RP Law if RP Law sees multiple 4-cost law
Yeah.
and what was it? And Black Maria. But Vegapunk doesn't lose to RP Law because you never have 7 cards in your hand.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's literally just Enel 2.0. But it's Vegapunk really struggles against decks that play big bodies
Mhm.
because your only answer to it is Raigo or Yamato, both of which are non-searchables, and you have to give up the healing effect of Yamato to KO something big. So like usually if you're playing against a 5-life leader like Bonnie, you have to Katakuri something to make them 6, and then to KO an 8-cost, you have to Vegapunk leader ability go to 2 life,
Uh-huh.
and then Yamato KO an 8-cost. So you lose out value on that, and that's why Vegapunk struggles against decks with top end. So against this deck, the strat for Vegapunk is literally go wide, do not swing, and then I just do the 6k, 6k, 6k plan. But if the BY player like curves out and they're able to start engine and go to like 9k base, it's quite hard for Vegapunk.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Understood. I have a feeling this matchup would have been pretty easy for us, but I want to at least bring it up because it is going to be getting
It
a lot
is, it is.
popular in '08. And as far as Calgara, which I mean, I don't think people are looking at Calgara anymore because there's just better decks like maybe Blue Doffy. But maybe that's another video
Yeah.
entirely, right? Because I don't think anyone knows what's going to happen with that, right? And then obviously we're not even looking into '09 too much yet because, well, Blackbeard, we don't know how popular Blackbeard's going to be, and this deck may be
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
rough against Blackbeard, to be honest, might not do very well, but that's kind of
So
the game.
I've actually considered playing Raigo in OP9. So like the 10 cost Kuzan build and the Ice Age, like they all deal with 9 costs. But I mean, this is like again another 4 months into the future. But when OP9 comes, every deck in the game will like have a 10 cost. Like red has so many 10 costs, green has Doffy, blue
Yeah.
has 10 costs, black has 10 costs. And but the thing is, if they play a 10 cost, they can't touch your leader. So if you go Raigo and you go 7k base, like it's basically as if your opponent just skipped a turn.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it's like your opponent skipped a turn. I'm sorry. I don't quite understand. Like if they play a 10 drop, and if you just if you okay, I understand. Yeah. Because I
Yeah.
mean,
So let's say
removing a 10 drop is just like it makes them feel useless in that
yeah.
regard.
So let's
So
say like if you're like the opponent's Blackbeard played the 10 cost blocker Blackbeard and then they activated leader ability. So like,
hmm.
oh, I can't more next turn, right? If you just go Raigo the 10 cost Blackbeard, becomes 7k base, it's basically as if your opponent just skipped
Yeah.
a turn.
Yeah. Okay. I understand now. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Got it.
Yeah, but like 4 months into the future.
Yeah, 4 months in the future. If there's a lot of Blackbeard, we might be playing Raigo in this deck. That's
Yeah, yeah.
that's kind of a different thought. Okay.
It's quite funny.
Interesting thoughts. Okay. I guess we should bring up Nami. I think Nami is
Mm.
a kind of a basic matchup a lot of people are gonna be playing into, especially just with the rise of popularity. I will at least comment a lot of players It feels like actually Nami lost popularity after Red Purple Law got banned, in my opinion. Even though it did listen, it did win a regional here, right? But a lot of players that switched to Nami, they just said, "Oh, this deck requires a lot of things to go right, even if you're not against the Red Purple Law." And it has nothing to do with the triggers. The triggers do help, but I want to know what your thoughts are about Nami specifically, and then what exactly what we should be doing against them if we do fight against them. So
I think Nami is a pretty good deck to take into this meta. Even in 08, like 08's decks are pretty slow. In any slow meta, like Nami is really good. Rebecca's also really good, but Nami is really good in a slower meta. Like like Lucci, where they just like play 8 drops. Yeah, Nami's fine. Um, into Bonnie's such a slow deck that without 9 cost Zoro, Nami's fine. Until Enel, free win.
yeah.
I think Nami's a good deck. Although that said, I mean, I can see how there may be like some awkward combination of hands with the Nami cards, but no, I still do believe Nami is a good deck. I was actually thinking of playing it as well if 09 didn't have so many aggro decks like Black Purple Luffy and Blue Doffy. But I think in a
Yeah.
slower meta, Nami's always a consideration.
Come.
As to how this deck fares into Nami, I think this deck is not bad into Nami. The reason
Yeah.
for that is just you have more 8 drops now with this list, so you don't have to worry about like situations where like, oh, I didn't draw Gecko Moria and now I just don't have a 9 drop. And I know we don't play Ace, and some people say you need Ace for the Nami matchup. I don't think so, because Ace is just a 7k swing, and a 7k swing against a Nami matchup is like not that great anyway. What I want to be doing in a Nami matchup is I want to have like ideally 3 9k bodies, like a 2 Morias or 1 Moria and 2 Luffys, and then I want to swing 13k on the first Moria. And 13k is basically 1 2 3 4. It's basically 5 Dawn from the Nami, because for a Nami player,
Yeah.
2 Dawn is 4k. So if they block the 13k, then the rest of my stuff is hitting them. If they take the 13k, then I just pass.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
Yep.
Interesting. So I like that idea. So we're building up our board. Are we swinging before this too? Like, are we trying to tickle them out of cards as much as we can? Or are we actually maybe doing like, maybe 1 or 2 waiting turns in the middle of the game if they have like 3 Dawn up?
Yeah, we'll definitely do some waiting turns. If
Okay.
you can swing more than their Dawn can block, then sure. But we're definitely doing some waiting turns. It's okay to do waiting turns too, because if you see Isho, you basically take 2 cards from their hand.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're definitely doing some waiting turns. A good benchmark for you if like you're playing against a Nami is um 1 Dawn for a Nami player is about 0.8 cards milled from the deck. So if you take a standard Nami list and you take all the cards that can mill cards or draw cards from their deck, 1 Dawn is about 0.8 cards milled.
Okay.
Yeah, of course there's some exceptions to this, like if they see like
Yeah.
Kaya Pilaf,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
But
But
like
and on
uh,
average, like 10 Dawn equals 8 cards,
yeah,
which is,
yeah,
a
on
quarter of their
average, yes.
deck, right? When we're thinking about
Yeah,
it.
yeah. So, if they have like 15 cards, 13 cards left in the deck, and like you can kind of gauge how many turns you have left.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I had like a Nami guide on here earlier, a few weeks ago, and in that we did kind of talk about like the 40 card to 30 card, the 30 card to 12 card, and the 12 card to 0 card, which is like the big things. Once you
Oh,
hit 12
yeah,
cards,
yeah.
you're pretty much on free. You're pretty much gonna win the game, right? Like if
Yeah,
depending
yeah.
on the scenario. So I do recommend people to at least play Nami so you have an idea of what their problems are if you're
Yes.
specifically trying to figure out this matchup. But I kind of like your approach of it. Play down some kind of 8 drop. Put, I think you said 4 Dawn, go to 13k, swing 13k, and then maybe develop a body, or just swing with your bodies if they do counter out of that, because it's just gonna ask them for a little too much over the long
Yep.
term. And then it's a good idea to do a couple waiting turns maybe on like the first turn, if you have nothing to do, you can swing like 9k. If you go second, right, you have nothing else to do. I can see that being an interesting thing. I would tell people never swing 5k because they'll just +1 and draw a
Yeah.
card.
Yeah, never swing 5k, please. Never swing
Yeah,
5k.
it's just a
Unless
bad
you're an
idea.
aggro deck, like never swing 5k.
Yeah, and there'll be times too where they're going to actually use White Snake, and they're going to become a 6k leader. So now you guys want to swing either 8 or 10k at them, depending on what's going on with that scenario. But it's kind of a finicky matchup. If Nami sees it all, it's going to be tough. If they don't see it all, then it's actually going to be a normal game.
Yeah.
And so that's how most matchups are when you think about it. Oh, they saw it. Oh, they didn't see it. But for Nami, they're gonna see all 50 cards at some point. It's just what curve are they gonna see them at? Especially with their Megatech hanger. I mean, hanger should just be removed generally, and I'll at least tell people definitely look at removing either hanger or Kaya's with your Rocket Luffy, right?
Yes, I was about to say that too. So if there's like 2 Kayas on the board, I think you can kind of just give up. But if there's 1 Kaya on the board, you should remove it with Rocket Luffy, just so they don't bounce it and play Kaya again.
Yeah. Well, it might be a good turn where you just do Rocket Luffy and do a waiting turn, and then the next turn you kill another one, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's not it's not perfect. We're not in a perfect world with that.
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. And hopefully Isho actually hits a good card if you're able to draw this card into their
Yeah,
deck.
if Isho hits like 2 Gavels, holy.
Yeah. Well, if they hit like, yeah, exactly. I mean, this is gambling. There's like a TikTok everyone quotes now, right? Where it's like, let's go gambling. And I say this every single time we play Isho.
My god.
Oh, dang it.
Yeah,
Oh, dang it.
I roll a dice for Isho, by the way.
Oh, you do?
I don't know whether I don't know where they do it there, but I got into like a huge argument with someone once because he
Yeah.
wanted to like pick cards, but I said let's just roll
Oh.
a dice because you can see people's curve when you pick cards.
Yeah. Well, here, some people do roll dice, but sometimes people have too many cards. So, like, rolling a dice just takes too much time, right? So, we just tell the opponent to shuffle their hand, and then your opponent picks the 2 cards.
The 2 numbers.
Yeah. Well, you could choose if it's random, but I'll just be like, oh, I'll choose like the top 2 or the middle 2 or the bottom 2. Like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Is if they shuffled their hand, right? If they organize their hand, then it's really funny, But you always ask your opponent to shuffle their hand, and I actually against every black deck, I already pre-shuffle my hand when they go to their 8 dawn turn. I'm like, okay, Isho. I'm like asking you, can you please Isho me?
Yeah,
and they're like, they don't have it. They're just like, yeah.
I see.
So it's that kind of scenario, which is funny. So, but I don't know. Regardless of how that works, there. But you said you had a full argument with somebody about that. They wanted to pitch it themselves.
Yeah, they wanted to pick the cards, and I was like, no, we could just roll a dice. I was like,
did they want to like pick those specific cards too? You think?
Yeah, they wanted me to like flatten the cards, and then they wanted to pick the cards, and it was just like it was very clear what your intention was.
Yeah, they didn't even shuffle the cards up and everything, huh? That is a little. I can understand, and there are other decks that have you choose the card, right? Or other cards, but those are very specific, like Jack or X Drake. But the wording is so strange here, and I'm not even sure how Japanese translation goes. And
the wording is it's your opponent chooses the card.
Exactly, and I don't know. I don't know where you're from. If does everyone just know Japanese enough for the card game, or are they like pretty fluent in Japanese because of this?
No, we just read the translation.
Oh, okay, got it. Does that get really confusing mid tournament? You have to like pull up your phone, like this is what the card says, dude. Like,
surprisingly, has never happened. In One Piece.
Okay, because here it comes up every now and then, even though it says it in plain English, but most card players they're used to playing Yu-Gi-Oh and they don't read their cards, so they just kind of know what it does.
I played Yu-Gi-Oh.
So yeah, that's the same scenario where we don't read our cards actually. We just kind of assume that does the right thing. So okay, yeah, I got it. But Perona is actually the one of I would say this matchup could be really difficult. Like really, really difficult.
It
They
can.
play the best black cards and the best green cards, and for some reason, this leader skill is just so bonkers. It just makes so your Sabo doesn't even exist, right? When they play cards like
Yeah.
Bellamere, which reduces Sabo by 1, and then they even if you have 2 Sabos out, you know, being at 0 life is like really dangerous because they can just rest that and then swing like 15k. But what are your thoughts if you see a Perona sitting in front of you at nationals? What would you consider doing? What's your thought process?
I'm offering a no, I'm not offering a handshake. But yeah, actually, I was thinking about playing Perona post ban. Honestly, like the deck looks good. You know, against Lucci, you rest Rebecca. Against Bonnie, you're black. Against Luffy, you have 9+0. But yeah, I think the Ice Age version is better against Perona.
Okay,
Because
I agree.
like your 10 cost Kuzan is not sticking, right? If you play 10 cost Kuzan, they just stuff you. So I think your game plan against Perona is pretty much the same as any other black deck.
Mhm.
Like you're just swinging them and then you're playing Sabo. Like that's pretty much it.
Okay.
There's just not much variety you can do against
Yeah.
Perona.
I guess if they play searchers, you want to remove those searchers as quick as possible, right? That's
I do want to remove those
yeah.
searches.
Might
Yeah.
be a good idea to play down Garps early. Well, then they just swing at your
Yes,
Garp.
it is. So if you're going first, it's fine. Yeah, but if you're going second, I mean, you can still play the guard if you need to find Sabo. But
Yeah.
yeah, there are 2 decks that playing a guard on the first turn is actually important.
Okay.
The first is Perona, and the second is Bonnie, just so that you can swing the 1 cost searcher.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes they'll have 2 searchers on their 3 Dawn turn, right? And they won't actually leave enough for leader skill. So when you go to your 4 Dawn turn, you can swing at both. So
Yep.
Okay, got it. But I guess the main thing we're kind of trying to take advantage of that they are a 4 life leader. If they don't
Yeah,
play blocker, they are going to be suffering because they're not that aggressive.
exactly. So it's basically the same game plan as Lucci, but we're just trying to. They have like 1 turn less to play a big body because we're putting so much pressure on them.
I think we covered most of the major matchups that I really wanted to cover over. I kind of want to do like a final gloss over of final thoughts. I mean, I'm most likely taking this to nationals, right? I'll be play testing probably both lists. I'm definitely an Isho fan over the past weekend. For me, I was playing one,
Yeah,
now I'm on
that's big.
2. Um, but with this, I'll be testing this list out going forward. Is there any things you would tell people if they're prepping for both nationals for North America or any other tournaments going forward?
Yeah. I think this is so. I mean, gameplay aside, we've talked about matchups.
Yep.
Of course, if you're seriously preparing for nationals, I think it's very important that you know the curve of the matchups that you're going to play. Like,
Mm.
it's important for you to obviously know um, in the meta what decks are going to be popular and what they're most likely going to be playing. Like, what is their optimal curve?
Okay.
Because if they don't see that specific curve, then you're already ahead in mid game, right? So
Mm.
you should know that at the back of your head. You should be prepared for it, and likewise, you should be prepared what your curve is. You should be very clear. What do I want to play on turn 3? What do I want to play on turn 4? And to everyone that's prepping for nationals, I know nationals or like big events like when we
Yeah.
have CS and everything. This is usually a time where people try to like bring spice and they'll like try their hardest to bring some like insane tech card that's gonna like break open the meta. Sure, do that, but when you build your list, I think it's very important to know exactly what each card does.
Mm.
I'm a big fan of the fat in my list, which is why I don't play cards like 4 cost Kuzan anymore, why I don't play cards like Raite. Like, those cards obviously have scenarios where they would be good,
Yeah.
but when I'm playing like a 8 round, 9 round Swiss tournament and followed by like top 32 card, I want every card in my deck to pull its own weight, and I have a game plan for every matchup already. I'm not
Yeah.
really looking for general purpose cards unless like they're really, really good. but I'm like, I already know what I need to do to secure my win con in each game.
Got
And
it,
that's
yeah.
something that you should be very clear about as well. And that's something that you should be thinking about when you build your deck list.
Exactly. Something consistent over 8, 9, 10 games is going to
Exactly.
be the general best thing. I mean, there are probably more consistent decks than Black Yellow Luffy in general, like Gecko Moria leader, for example. But I mean, if I think this is a pretty consistent list for Black Yellow Luffy while dealing with that, especially the fact that we have literally 7 searchers and mills and such like that, and ways to slow down the game. That's kind of why I like this list. So I do appreciate you following up with that final thing. Know your curve, know your kind of opponent's curve, and know what you're going to be doing against your opponents generally with that practice, especially really good players, because especially if you're going to nationals, you're going to be seeing this issue. A lot of people, and I will say, nationals for North America is probably going to be like 1,000 people, but there is a tournament the day before nationals. Like it's like a Friday, okay? And it's the last chance qualifier. So you're going to be seeing a lot of people going to that tournament to hopefully get into nationals the day before nationals, right? So this guide may apply to mostly those players that are looking to do that because they haven't got their national invite yet. But that's kind of my thought. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I do want to do a follow-up guide in OPO8 when it actually finally hits us, and we may just go over a few other more popular matchups that we're trying to figure out. A lot of deck lists are being changed, especially things like Reiju. Reiju isn't that big currently, in my opinion, just because of the way the meta is shaped up, but Reiju is probably going to be a little bit more popular in 08 before 08.5. Right? But I do want to say this deck shouldn't have a big problem against it. You're just playing around pudding and just hitting their face. So
exactly.
Yeah, I appreciate you being on here again as final thoughts. Again, everybody, if you're through this video this deep, you're probably watching for the second or third time, right? Go check out Enigma. Make sure you guys follow him on Twitter. He does post some things on there that are pretty interesting, and he is going to be having coaching if you want a little more one-on-one time with him, really on anything. It seems that he has a test group where he's able to pick people's brains and figure out what the best thing to do is, 3 or 4 months from now. So he has an idea of what to do now. But do you have any last words or sayings before you leave us today?
Yeah. Good luck in nationals. Good luck in LCQ. And if we do end up playing Rago 3 months later, know that I was here. We were here.
We were here. All right. Thank you. And thank you all so much for watching this video. We'll see you in the next one. Ciao.